Chapter 1105. Religions always wanted to attribute the progress and struggle of civilization to the illusory gods, while the public always wanted to attribute the progress and morality to universal values and the innate rights of human beings. However, they did not answer the question. Since human rights were innate, why did it take until now for human beings to have universal and equal rights? Were the rights of human beings eaten by dogs in feudal, primitive society, and the early days of capitalism? The answer was simple. They all wanted people to forget the struggles, bloodshed, and revolutions for these rights. In any case, the inhuman race bred their own people, not slaves. Therefore, their selection and cultivation was not as crazy as that of the American Alliance. They chose their marriage partners through genetic matching, and the genes awakened by the Tirigan crystal mist were used to determine their caste. Those with the least genetic damage and the most potential were assigned to the royal family. They were divided into different castes: Alpha, Beta, Gamma, and Omega, i.e., royal family. The lowest among them was the Alpha original caste. After the awakening of the Tirigan crystal mist, those with the most genetic damage and the lowest potential would be assigned to this caste, even if they were royal family before the awakening. They would lose most of their rights, including freedom of marriage and some personal right. After a long period of selection and breeding, the genes of the royal family of the mutants were optimized, and their abilities were the most powerful. As for the alphas, not only were their abilities weak, but they also suffered from serious side effects. They were also deformed, and most of them had genetic diseases. Many of them were psychopathic because of this. Maximus was the hope of these people. If King Blackbat represented the powerful and noble royal family, the elder family, and the interests of the mutants, then Maximus represented the interests of the mutants of the lower castes. He represented their political ambitions. This was the reason why Maximus was able to seize power even though he did not have the support of the mutants. Even if King Blackbat defeated Maximus 100 times, his base would still support him. This was because Maximus was the only one of the higher castes who had common interests with the lower caste. He had a pure bloodline and excellent genes, but because of an accident when the Tirigan crystal mist was awakened, he lost his abilities. In the eyes of the lower castes, he could understand their fate and stand on their side. From this point of view, Maximus was not stupid. He understood the most brilliant politics of a politician: always stand with those who support you. This was the reason why some seemingly stupid politicians could not fall. They looked stupid, lame, and greedy, but they could still stand after being attacked. Because their roots were strong, and Maximus knew what the lower castes needed. They needed more than equality. Not only did the pursuit of equality go against the scientific selection of the mutants, it would also destroy their future. The number of mutants with powerful abilities would decrease, and they would lose their trump cards to survive in the universe. Moreover, it would offend the most powerful mutants. They would not fall out with Maximus just because he had banished King Blackbat, but they would definitely rebel because Maximus had abolished the caste system. What the lower castes need to do is to stand above the rest and stand above the lower caste. In other words, they had had enough of being oppressed and wanted to be oppressed by someone of a lower status, such as the untouchables in the Indian caste system. Maximus then declared that he wanted to conquer Earth. He did not need to say anything, and the lower castes would think that they could be above others. They could stand on top of humans, do whatever they wanted, and become conquerors. They were not the lowest of the low, but humans were. They could live the life they dreamed of. The weak would wield their knives against the weaker ones. Those who were oppressed would vent their anger on those who were weaker by 1,000 folds. In the palace, Maximus listened to the words that his followers wanted to hear the most. He encouraged them. The humans on Earth are very weak. They don't have any special abilities. Even the worst mutant can easily conquer them. Their government is made up of mediocre people. They're all fat and incompetent bureaucrats. Their technology is very backward. Everyone can see that their most advanced aerospace technology is just to put a human in a thick bag, spacesuit, and send him to the moon. Many of us have secretly seen the toys sent here by the most powerful country on Earth. When they put up the flag, I even peed on it. The crowd below roared with laughter. Many of them had red eyes as they greedily listened to everything Maximus said. And there are actually as many as 6 billion of these weak slaves. Everyone will be given hundreds of thousands of slaves to produce everything for you, using the rich resources on Earth. After conquering Earth, humans will be the lowest caste. I call them untouchables. They will provide for you. You are the warriors and officials of our country, and they are the slaves. Maximus shouted. We let go of such rich resources and such a large population. Instead of conquering, we hold up on this narrow and barren moon. Do you think this is the right thing to do? What about our people? Whose fault do you think this is? One of the strange-looking low-caste mutants raised his arms and shouted, It's the Black Bat King's fault. He only knows how to oppress us, but he is too weak to conquer Earth. The mutants below were boiling. The Black Bat King. It's all the Black Bat King's fault. Fortunately, we overthrew the Black Bat King. Otherwise, he would be too cowardly to conquer Earth. The faces of the royals sitting on the stage changed. They looked at the agitated low-caste mutants below and felt fear in their hearts. They finally understood how intense the internal conflict among the mutants had become. Just like the upper echelons of Earth, they began to fear the possibility of a revolution. But they also knew that this had nothing to do with the Black Bat King. Long before the Black Bat King was born, the mutants were forced to move to the moon. Of course, they did not do it voluntarily. Compared to Earth, the moon was too barren. When they were on Earth, it wasn't that the Inhumans didn't want to conquer Earth. Obviously, the humans on Earth weren't lambs waiting to be slaughtered. They only came to the moon because they were forced into a corner by the Earthlings. The Black Bat King had been restraining Maximus all these years because he did not want him to court death. Maximus was well aware of this. He said all this, but what he really wanted was to take advantage of the civil strife on Earth to occupy a small country with a population of hundreds of thousands to satisfy the interests of his supporters. He boasted that the mutants still had the power to occupy a small country. At that time, the resources of that small country could easily satisfy the appetite of the mutants, who had a population of less than 10,000. Chapter 1106. The mutants in the entire Alanti Palace gathered together and cheered wildly toward Maximus, who was sitting on the throne. The low-caste mutants were venting their desire for victory. Queen Medusa, the wife of the Black Bat King, stood up. Under the dissatisfied gazes of Maximus' supporters, Medusa said sternly, You know, the Black Bat King would never do such a thing. As a king, he ruled the mutants with self-control and benevolence. All the measures we have taken are for survival, including the caste. Without the caste, we would have long lost our power in the long era of isolation. The Kree created us and tried to enslave us to use us as their weapons. The mutants resisted precisely because they did not want to be involved in the war. Now you're dragging them into another war. You are instigating them to be arrogant, making them think that superpowers are omnipotent. Humans are not lambs waiting for death. Peace is of supreme significance not only to Earth but also to us. A few years ago, I saw with my own eyes the army of Earth come to the moon and kill an evil god on the dark side of the moon. We can start a war, but we can't end it. There are so many mutants. We can't afford to lose them. Medusa said. Maximus, I can't sit back and watch you lead our people to their deaths. The fanatical crowd below fell silent. They wanted to resist and refute, but the long-term servility of the mutant royal family made them not dare to speak for a moment. Maximus stood up and picked his ear at Medusa. He said, All I heard are the clichés of the royal family. The people of Earth are strong and peace is precious. And the Black Bat King. You said the people of Earth are strong, and they killed the evil god. Who saw it? Who believes it? No. Someone shouted. We didn't see it. The mutants at the bottom said angrily. You're just a weak upper class and ruling class. You'd rather oppress your compatriots than rob them. You have great power, yes, but you're not willing to use it to fight for survival for us. You're a bunch of cowards. Maximus shouted. Cowards? Shouts after shouts came from below. Coward! Amidst the roars of support, Medusa's expression was stubborn and furious. Her hair moved like countless snakes, spreading longer and longer. However, Maximus did not retreat. He stood in front of Medusa and said, Why? Do you want to kill me, the king? Your ambition will drag the non-humans into hell. Medusa said, I have to stop you. Maximus quickly took out a small titanium alloy can and sprayed it on Medusa's head. Medusa did not act immediately due to hesitation, but her snake hair soon drooped down as if it had lost its life. She nervously grabbed her head and saw a large strand of hair falling from her scalp, followed by more. Medusa's hair quickly stripped her clean. She looked at her bald head and screamed. Maxim laughed and said, My dear queen, don't tell me you don't even know about hair remover? He stood on the throne and looked down at Medusa. Why? With this ridiculous ability of yours? What kind of superpower is controlling hair? It is this ability that can make you superior and oppress people like us who have no ability. But just a bottle of high-strength hair remover is enough to cripple you. This hair remover I specially made for you can make people unable to grow hair for the rest of their lives. What use do you have for your ability? In fact, Medusa did retain some of her ability, but she would rather die than attack Maximus with her armpit hair in front of all the non-humans. It is these things, the insignificant things created by science, that can destroy you. And what right do you have to be superior? Maximus said agitatedly, I am the smartest of the non-humans. I control the technological development of the non-humans, but I have no status in front of King Blackbat because I have no ability. Now I want to say that your abilities are worthless to me. He pressed a button on the side of his hand, and the members of the royal family, who were eager to try, collapsed on the chair as if electrocuted. Gorgon, who had the ability to create earthquakes, rushed up and was sucked into a jar of viscous liquid. At this time, the defense alarm in the palace suddenly rang. Maximus thought that someone else's ability had accidentally triggered the alarm and ignored it. Soon, a strong tremor hit the palace, and the palace's defense system was automatically activated. Maximus' expression finally changed. He rushed to the canister that Gorgon was hiding in and asked in confusion, The buffer fluid inside is specially made by me. How can your ability bypass the absorption of the buffer fluid and exert its effect? Gorgon raised his head and mouthed inside the jar, Because I did not use my ability. The next moment, a warrior wearing a black battlesuit that looked a bit like King Blackbat, his ears and black mask were a bit similar, was smashed into the palace's defense shield. He leaned against the palace's energy shield and seemed to be unconscious. Chara's sister was remotely taking over her brother's battlesuit. She said with a sobbing tone, Activate motion capture and combat assistance system. Stimulated by the electrical signals from the Black Panther battlesuit, the Black Panther reacted instinctively. He leaped up like a leopard and pounced on the energy shield. His limbs stuck to the energy shield, and the claws of the battlesuit sucked on the shield like pads of flesh. He stuck close to the shield, and was even absorbing the energy of the shield. Maximus saw this turn of events and shot a look at his supporter, Franti, who had super strength. Flento rushed forward, walked out of the shield, and punched the Black Panther who was waiting for Ulysses Crow. The Black Panther was unconscious, and in order to deal with Crow's sister, Princess Su-Rue, she had activated the destruction program. Under such circumstances, the Combat Assistance Program prioritized survival and destruction as its first priority. It was extremely ruthless, and Su-Rue had obviously forgotten that there were others on the moon. So the Black Panther jumped up and tore Flento apart with one claw. The claws made of vibranium and adamantium vibrated at a high frequency, easily tearing Flento apart like a cat tearing through toilet paper. In the end, Flento was turned into strips of flesh and blood. Maximus was a little frightened. He stood up and immediately saw the Black Panther being sent flying by a silver shadow onto the energy shield. Crow stepped on the moon rock and slowly walked out from behind. Maximus was overjoyed. "Your Excellency Crow, thank you for defeating the Earthlings who were plotting to attack Allantai. With an ally like you, the Inhumans will definitely do their best to help you conquer Earth." Crow looked at Maximus, who was smiling obsequiously. "Get lost. Don't disturb me while I teach the enemy a lesson." He pressed down on the Black Panther's head with such force that it was directly pressed into the energy shield. The Inhumans could even hear the sound of the energy shield being overwhelmed. Crow glanced at the Inhumans and smiled coldly. "Useless test subject. Make your final contribution to the Master." He squeezed slightly, and the electrons that overflowed from his fingertips shot through the energy shield. Behind the Black Panther's head, the energy shield shattered into countless pieces like a thin piece of paper. A powerful ripple swept out and tore the entire palace into pieces. 90% of the Inhumans' population exploded into a cloud of blood mist. Maximus' eyes were about to split open. He was detained, but the roasting had unexpectedly turned into protection. Medusa, who was lucky enough to survive, let out a shrill scream. Medusa, who had accidentally activated her other abilities due to her agitation, let out a banshee-like howl, and super-high-frequency sound waves shot in the opposite direction of Crow. However, the sound waves that could cause a person's head to explode could only clean up the dust on Crow's body. A mere small inhuman race dares to say that they want to encroach on Earth. Crow sneered. "As the guard of Earth's laboratory, I am duty-bound. I'll destroy you guys while I'm at it." "Clearly," Maximus screamed. Crow casually flicked a ripple and turned him into powder. He carried the Black Panther, who had already turned into a dead fish, with one hand, and retracted the finger that had flicked Maximus to death with the other hand. He slowly walked toward the participating Inhumans. Medusa ran to the place where the Pterygon crystal was kept and injected a large amount of the crystal into her body. She knew that whether it was for the sake of the Black Bat King or the Inhumans, she had to stop Crow from destroying Allantai at all costs. Before the remaining Inhumans could react, Crow looked at them and said in a low voice, "I was going to kill this king of Wakanda, but since you're already here, I might as well get rid of you guys as well. As mutants who imitate Master's experiments, you inferior test subjects have no right to live in Master's laboratory. Master has given you guys a chance, but even the best of you can't satisfy him. If that's the case, I can only let you guys die. In this galaxy, only those who show their worth are qualified to live." Medusa understood something. "You want to kill us just because you think we don't deserve to live." Crow tilted his head and said, "If you're smart enough, you should know how to let your species survive." Medusa glanced at the few mutants that were left behind. She fell into despair. The mutants had been annihilated. The only survivor was probably the Black Bat King who had been sent to Earth. This might be a blessing in disguise, but without his species, how could the Black Bat King survive? Medusa knew that the Black Bat King was a person with an extraordinary sense of responsibility. She had to give the Black Bat King a reason to live. She looked at the Pterygon crystal in her hand and suddenly threw it to Tetanus, a bulldog behind her. She shouted to Tetanus, "Send this thing to Earth." Tetanus instinctively bit the Pterygon crystal and activated its ability. Yes, even if it was a dog, as long as it was powerful, it was still a member of the royal family. This was the rule of the Inhumans. Medusa turned to look at Crow. Her eyes shot out a beam of light, and wherever the beam went, everything turned into stone. Among the stone statues, the silver crow was still floating. Even the black panther in his hand had not turned into stone. He looked at Medusa indifferently. Gorgon broke free from the trap and threw Medusa's sister, Crystal, at Tetanus, while he himself pounced on Crow. The inhuman Kalnike, who had the ability to see through any weakness, desperately tried to find Crow's weakness, but in his deduction, Crow was invincible. He howled in pain, and tears of blood flowed from his eyes. Medusa's younger sister, Crystal, also disappeared along with the big dog, Tetanus, and was teleported to Earth. In the end, she witnessed with her own eyes the mutants who rushed towards Klaus were easily crushed by Klaus as if they were ants. The mutants of Alanti were exterminated. From then on, she was deeply traumatized by Earth. Chapter 1107. A week ago, a black bald head slowly walked into the night. This was Louisiana, bordered by Arkansas to the north, Texas to the west, Mississippi to the east, and the Gulf of Mexico to the south. However, the bald one-eyed man was not walking on the streets of New Orleans. Instead, he was walking in a typical southern town in the Delta region. He held a map in his hand and looked down at it. However, the hand-drawn map was completely based on subjective perception. The person who drew it had not received any map-drawing training, so even an elite agent like Black Lubed Egg could not tell what was marked on it. However, the B***starred who asked him out had only given him this map. Black Egg had to stop a person on the road. It was also a typical southern redneck old man. He asked, "Hey, brother, do you know where Ben Devereaux's old house is? Someone asked me to meet him there." The old man glanced at him coldly, his eyes full of disgust. He shouted at him, "F***ck off, Black Egg. Hey, I didn't offend you. This is the United States now, not the Southern Alliance. We're not in the Southern Alliance. You'd better show some respect," Nick Fury said unhappily. The redneck old man's face was gloomy, revealing an indescribable gloom. He muttered as if he was having a seizure, "Now the United States is protecting you. If it was in that era, even 60 years ago, there would be no place for you devils to live here. We will burn you and your nest to ashes under the leadership of our priests, wearing pointy hats." The old man leaned on his cane, his mind a little muddled. He was so agitated that his whole body was trembling. He shouted, "Burn you to ashes! F***ck off, devils!" He mumbled a passage from the Bible, took out the silver cross on his chest, and pointed it at Nick Fury. She even acted as if she wanted to chase him away, waving her walking stick as she chased after him shakily. Facing such a muddled old man, even the king of agents could not do anything. Nick covered his head and fled. He ran into an alley without street lights under the old man's scolding. As he ran, he complained, "D*****. Nick was very angry. He scolded with a black accent, "D*****, old B*****. I'm much older than you. I can be your father now. Damn shit. He almost ruined my favorite old suit, made by a tailor in 1942. Nick shook his pants that were stained with mud. He lifted his head and saw a gloomy and old house appear before him. He took out the map and saw a graffiti-like silhouette on the target location. The silhouette was strangely similar to the side of the house when it was dark. This old house was located in the most secluded part of the town. If not for Nick's panic, he would not have been able to find it after running for a long time through the muddy path between the trees and weed. It was there, and it attracted all of Nick's attention as if it was magic. The old house was surrounded by dark gray fences and high walls. Nick turned to the entrance and saw that the gate to the courtyard was rusty and unlocked. He pushed the gate open, and the unoiled rusted shaft made a loud squeaking sound. Nick couldn't help but praise, "All right. This is really more useful than any D****MN modern anti-theft measures." Although Nick had a way to sneak in without anyone noticing, the identity of the person who invited him made him abandon this useless thought and open the gate openly. The old house was quiet. Suddenly, there was the sound of someone moving with difficulty. Soon, a woman with a hunched back, who looked a little old and lethargic, opened the old wooden door and asked outside, "Who is it?" Nick greeted politely and said, "Someone asked me to come here. It's AD*MN young Asian. He probably claims to be an insurance investigator." The woman stared at him for a long time until Nick felt that his face was a little strange. Then she said in a hoarse voice, "There is such a person, come in." Any normal person would feel that the woman's eyes were a little too gloomy. And the environment of the old house made it difficult for people to think of anything good. This old building had nothing to do with classicality and elegance at all. There was only rotten mold, rotten wood, and worn-out furniture, which made the big house full of a stale smell that could not be dispersed. The age of the woman was a little vague. She looked lethargic and a little hunched. When she brought Nick Fury in, Nick also saw that wrinkles and age spots had begun to appear on her hand. But the roots of her hair were still black, and although her face was not well maintained, there were no signs of old age. According to Nick's profile of her, old and young, even a little like himself. Only then did Nick really become interested. The woman carried a lantern and led him up the stairs. The light in the study was on, and Chen Ang's voice came from inside. "The insurance amount Mrs. Ellis's aunt left her is about $280,000, which is not a small amount. However, we found that there are some problems with her file. Ever since she married you, she seems to be a little isolated. Her good friend, the lead singer of a rock band, and her ex-boyfriend, claimed that you were controlling and manipulating her, mentally detaining her. This theory is quite popular among Mrs. Ellis's young social circle. People say that she was hired by Mrs. Violet to take care of her husband when she was young, and that you were Mrs. Violet's trusted lawyer. In the end, to thank you for your care, Violet entrusted the house and the couple's personal safety to your care before the stroke, and you got married immediately after the incident. It's hard not to make inappropriate speculations. For example, did you work together to control the Violet couple and occupy their inheritance?" Investigator Constantine. Another hearty and somewhat deep voice laughed. "You're too good at guessing. In fact, people did have these doubts in the beginning. You know that I'm a professional in the law. They couldn't find any evidence to overturn everything from the act of gift, so they told the judge that Caroline and I had a special relationship with the two old people, and that we could reasonably control them by working together. I told the judge that there was no dirty exchange of interests between us, and that it was all due to the magic of love. That's how we met, but the judge also seemed to have doubts. She ruled that we should accept a supervised inheritance and assume the obligation to take care of our two generous employers. At that time, people in the town said that they would not live long because of us. But they lived for 10 years. Chen Ong complimented politely. "Ah, yes, we carefully took care of them for 10 years, as if they were our parent. In the first 3 years, this kind of malicious slander was still very popular, but as time went by, these storms all dissipated. People still believe us, believe in the kindness of human nature." Nick listened at the door. When he pushed the door open, he saw Chen Ong and a white middle-aged man sitting on 2 big chairs next to the fireplace, talking by the fire. When they heard the sound of Nick coming in, they turned to look at the door. Chen Ong smiled and stood up to greet him. He shook hands with Nick and Fury and said with a smile, "Nick, you're finally here." He introduced to the couple, Nick Fury, a federal legal officer, also responsible for the execution of the court's estate judgment. "We will work together to handle the estate transfer, and related matters related to tax payment." Nick opened his mouth and complained, "Oh, Investigator Constantine, you mentioned the tax department. Do you want me to be kicked out of here with a broom?" He turned to the middle-aged white man, who was probably a retired lawyer, and said, "I'm just a bailiff, I don't collect taxes. I'm here to give you money, please don't kick me out." Everyone laughed together, and the atmosphere was joyous. Even in the United States, the best way to close the gap was still to complain about the tax department together. Everyone expressed some dissatisfaction with the IRS, Internal Revenue Service, and the distance between each other was greatly shortened. The hostess, or rather, Mrs. Matthew, Caroline Ellis Matthew, was still standing gloomily next to them. She was in the shadows, and her back was hunched even more. Her husband, Luke Matthew, seemed to be unable to stand it any more. With a hint of a scolding tone, he said, "Go and make a pot of coffee for the guests." The woman staggered away. Before she left, her face flickered in the shadows, and it was somewhat creepy and hideous. However, both Chin-Ong and Nick saw it, but they were indifferent. They even wanted to laugh. Nick thought so, leaning against the fireplace. He really couldn't help but laugh. At first, he just covered his mouth and laughed muffled, but he couldn't help but laugh out loud. He pointed at Chin-Ong and almost laughed himself to death. He asked, "What do you mean by sending me this thing?" He took out the map and asked, "Do you expect me to find this place with this thing?" Luke saw their reaction and seemed to be a little uneasy. He twisted his body to express the annoyance in his heart. Chin-Ong looked at the map and said, "I used this thing to find my way here. We found this map in Mrs. Caroline's aunt's belongings. This is the address of her only relative, and Mrs. Caroline sent it to her in a letter." Only then did Nick stop laughing. He carefully looked at the graffiti on the map and said, "How cute! Especially the graffiti silhouette of this house." Mr. Luke somewhat awkwardly took over from Nick's words and said, "Thank you, this was left behind by my wife when she was very, very young. At that time, she was still a naughty girl." Nick suddenly said, "Can you ask Mrs. Caroline to draw me another silhouette? I want to keep it, so that when I tell people about this adventure in the future, I can show them this map and let them find the route on it." Chin-Ong snatched the map away and said, "Don't even think about it. I want to keep this map for myself. You know that I like to collect all kinds of souvenirs from every case I handle. I once collected a hockey mask a few years ago. It was given to me by one of my beneficiaries. He had to wear this mask given to him by his mother every night before he could sleep. But he gave it to me. That was the best gift I have ever received. That hockey mask." Nick suddenly burst out laughing. "So there is such a story. Then what about the Iron Man mask in your office? Was it also given to you by Tony Steck? And the old videotape? The voodoo doll on the bookshelf? The glasses left by that crazy Sam's grandfather that you bought online at a high price? Oh my God! Sam's grandfather is really just a shoemaker. He has never been to the South Pole. Not even the North Pole." Chin-Ang's expression was calm as he said, "Mine is real." "What?" Nick smiled and made a black question mark. JPG with an exaggerated expression, which was unique to black people. "Mine is the real Captain Witwicky's glasses," Chin-Ong said calmly. Nick's expression froze. He put on a serious expression and stared at Chin-Ong. Just as the atmosphere between the two of them became more and more tense, the hunchbacked woman walked in silently with a pot of coffee. She seemed to be unaccustomed to the tense atmosphere in the room, and the coffee pot shook. At this time, Nick's face gradually revealed a sinister smile. Then, he grinned, revealing his white teeth. He pounded the table and laughed maniacally. "Constantine, you always have such a sense of humor. Like a damned Englishman's dry sense of humor." The coffee on the table almost spilled out, but Nick ignored it. He turned to the hostess and said, "Madam, this is the map you drew when you were young. To be honest, it's not easy for me to deal with it." Nick's mind flashed quickly. When the map sent by Chin-Ong arrived at SHIELD, the agents were on high alert and there were many inspection items. "Can you draw another one for me? I want to keep it as a souvenir," Nick said calmly. The hostess was at a loss. She subconsciously tightened her grip on the lace of her apron. Her hands tugged on the apron anxiously. Mr. Luke reminded her indifferently. Dear, is there anything wrong with drawing it? Nick pretended to be surprised and said, Did I offend you? The hostess said with great difficulty, No, no. She picked up a pen and scribbled on the white paper beside her. However, she could not draw well. In the end, she made a mess. Chen-Ong stopped her and said, Enough. Stop drawing. I'll give you the map. Nick's eyes widened and asked, Then what will you use as a souvenir? Investigator Constantine? Since you want it so much, why should I take it away from you? Chen-Ong said, Anything is fine as a souvenir. I'm just accepting some worthless gifts from the beneficiaries. Whether or not those things have any other meaning, they are already very meaningful to me. My career has given them an extraordinary meaning. Only then did the male host Luke relax. He smiled and said, As long as you want it, we can give you anything here as a gift. Chen-Ong looked around and did not seem to see anything interesting. Chapter 1108. Chen-Ang's choice surprised Luke. He carefully observed Chen-Ong and Constantine for a while before saying, Of course, Mr. Constantine. This master key can open all the doors in this house. Chen-Ong did not seem to react. He still smiled and said, My request is too abrupt. But who would have designs on this house? Luke smiled and said, This house might have been worth a lot of money in the past, but it's really old now. More than 4 generations have lived here, and we don't have the money to maintain this big house, so it's already broken down. This is also a small rural town, it's really not worth much. Nick interrupted, But in such an old house there must be a lot of antiques. That was a very valuable item. So this key can't be given to him. Luke smiled and said, Both of you are trustworthy people, and the 200,000 will be of great help to us. We plan to leave here after we get the inheritance. We're old and need better medical care and retirement conditions. We need better medical care and retirement conditions. With that money, we plan to move to New Orleans. Besides, all the antiques have been collected by us and placed in a room in the attic. That room has the only door in this house that can't be opened with a master key. Chen-Ong accepted the key without hesitation and said gratefully, Thank you for your generosity. It's been a pleasure talking with you. You're a knowledgeable person. It's like you've seen the history of this town and the changes of the times with your own eyes. I'm really interested in history, and this house has a very long history. It's like a gallery of time. Some of the styles and characteristics of the old era are well preserved here. Shall we take a look around? Luke welcomed them and said, After dinner, you can look around as you please. It's too old. It's useless except for its history. They leaned against the fireplace and chatted for a while, then had dinner in the dining room. The dinner was chickpeas with mashed potatoes, a classic rustic dish. After dinner, Luke said apologetically, I'm used to taking a nap after dinner, you know, it's the habit of country people. Our nightlife here is very boring, and we usually go to bed early. Chen-Ong and Nick looked at each other and nodded to show that they understood. There was a serious divide between American cities and rural towns. The international metropolis was full of music every night and had a developed nightlife, but the rural towns were simple and boring. The traditional Puritan lifestyle still dominated here, although the rural towns were now dominated by entertainment. The various parties and entertainment of young people were no worse than those in the cities. But this couple was very traditional. They were as traditional as the most conservative American Puritans. The slightly hunchbacked hostess brought Chen-Ong and the others to the guest room for them to rest in. The room was on the 2nd floor. When the door was opened, a faint moldy smell wafted out. The house was quite big. Although there was a moldy smell, it was still clean. Chen-Ong touched the table, and there was no dust on it at all. That was strange. This was a big house with 30 rooms. And Chen-Ong also came suddenly. He arrived one afternoon earlier than Nick, without any prior notice. People who lived in big houses knew that it was not practical to maintain the house for a long time. Even the kitchen that was not used would have dust. As long as it was not used, even the corners of the bedroom would have dust. This was the room of young people, let alone 2 middle-aged widows. How could they have the energy to clean up more than 30 rooms? This place should be covered with white cloth to seal up most of the unused rooms. Chen Ong put down his luggage and went to find Nick. Nick lived next door. The moment he stepped in, he found that it was also very clean. There was a moldy smell, but there was no dust, not even in the corners. Nick did not talk about Chen Ong suddenly calling him here. Instead, as if chatting, he naturally pulled out some information about the owner of this house from Chen Ong. They were clever with their words and exchanged a lot of information naturally. At the same time, they did not reveal anything about their own identity. It was enough to prevent the eavesdroppers from learning anything. There are many religious symbols and statues here. There are the Virgin Mary, the Son of God, and some biblical figures. Nick joked. You should be very interested. What I'm more curious about is... Chen Ong pointed at the top of the bed in Nick's room. There was something hanging from the ceiling. It was a doll about the size of a human palm with its eyes sewn on with a button. The doll's facial features, its nose and mouth, were all drawn on with a crude brush that looked like graffiti. Lying on the bed, opening your eyes and looking into this thing's eyes, what kind of feeling do you have? Not only was Nick not afraid, he was also curious after hearing what Chen Ong said. He lay back and a black bald head fell on the headboard. Its eyes were looking at the position where the doll was. It is quite cute. If I have a daughter, I will play with her with the doll. You know, I will be the kind of father who can put down his pride and is very approachable. First, you need to have a daughter, Chen Ong said indifferently. Also, before having a daughter, you need to have a wife, but you don't have one. Nick lied on the bed and said, I just went to the toilet. Can you imagine? Such a big house doesn't even have a mirror. Out of curiosity, I asked the woman who brought me here. She said, a mirror is a door. It will let you see bad things. If you want to live quietly in a place like this, it is best not to see a mirror. So she secretly rummaged through your luggage, Chen Ong said calmly. Her movements are very light, but I can still find out. It is not easy to hide from people like us, Nick said. It sounds like she also rummaged through your luggage. But the secrets of people like us will not be found out so easily. Is she looking for a mirror? It is possible for superstitious old people to do anything. Chen Ong did not seem surprised. Also, can you smell it? Nick's nostrils flared and he got up to sniff around. He turned to Chen Ong and said, There is a faint stench here. There are many kinds of stench, and I happen to be very familiar with this one. The relaxed expression on Nick's face gradually changed. At that moment, his eyes sharpened, but this feeling quickly disappeared. He had turned back into a black man who liked to do strange things. Chen Ong walked around the house. He used his feet to lift up the carpet on the ground. Underneath the carpet, he used white and red powder to draw 2 straight lines to block the door. Is there a special meaning to this? Nick asked. Salt can block evil damage, and the red brick powder is used in sea witchcraft to stop enemies from getting close. Chen Ong pinched the white powder and easily determined that it was salt. It was coarse salt that had not been filtered. Red brick powder was more difficult to determine. Thankfully, he was familiar with the mysterious cultures of various countries and regions. Chen Ong put down the carpet and said, In my place we usually use cinnabar. Is cinnabar more useful or salt and red brick? Nick asked curiously. I have never seen you work a case before. I have to say, when I saw your resume I was quite surprised. In the hands of an expert they are all useful. We follow the rules. Oh, tell me the truth, Nick said. Now we are partners, aren't we? Tell me some of the little secrets of your profession. Chen Ong said helplessly, Fine. I will say some. In folk witchcraft there is a very important principle. If you believe it, then it exists. If you don't, then it doesn't. Some spells rely on energy to work, like camartage. Sorcerers collect energy and forge it into weapons. That is why I said they follow the rules. But there are some magics that rely on faith. The sorcerer's will makes it work. Therefore, at that time, the subject's will is also very important. Once you don't believe in witchcraft, its power will be greatly reduced. This is because the world is material, and witchcraft is consciousness. Consciousness can work on consciousness, but it cannot work on material. Chapter 1109. In other words, this kind of witchcraft works sometimes? Nick was surprised. I thought they were all like strange. What kind of witchcraft do they have? I know how to deal with them in the future. Most of them are folk spells. China's Maitian, Russia's black mass, Africa's black witchcraft, and some voodoo witchcraft, including divine spells. Divine spells require faith to exert their power, and are also a type of willpower. Whether it is Satan or Jesus, many of the mass spells used by their churches belong to this category. Nick skillfully put on his gloves. He was wearing black clothes and even a black hoodie. Chenong laughed. Why are you still wearing those things? Although you are bald, you do not reflect light. In fact, if you go out naked, as long as you don't turn on the lights, no one can see you. If you say this to me in other places, I will warn you of racial discrimination. Nick pointed at Chenong. What about here? Chenong raised his eyebrows and asked. Here. Nick remembered the unpleasant experience on the way here and scolded. In Louisiana, that's already considered a friendly remark towards black people. There are black people everywhere, and the white people are still looking at me sideways. I always ask myself, is the South not liberated yet? Nick raised the tactical flashlight in his hand and said, Are we going out like this? I feel like we are two stupid thieves on a night trip. Don't alarm them. Chenong held the flashlight and stepped out of the door. The dim yellow light in the corridor illuminated their blurry shadows. They went down to the first floor and began to search separately with the lobby as the dividing line. Chenong told Nick in tactical sign language that he would go left and he would go right. Nick held the flashlight and felt his way to the left. In fact, he had some doubts in his heart. Why did Chenong call him here? The two big shots of the Divine Shield and the Holy Shield were like second-rate detectives exploring an old, for Americans, house. He knew that Chenong seemed to be looking for something. They had a tacit understanding. When some clues showed that there was something strange about this house and its owner, Nick had no reason not to play a game with Chenong. In particular, some signs faintly revealed a very important piece of information. The secret in this house was related to voodoo. Nick knew that one of the 5 seals that gave the Divine Shield and the Holy Shield headaches was one of the poison cult. It was hard for Nick to think that this had nothing to do with the seals. Nick opened the first door from the left of the porch and saw 2 figures at the door in the dark room. The first thing he saw was the dark figure standing against the door. Nick almost used his joints to of twisting and breaking its head. But soon Nick realized that it was just 2 puppets made of straw. At a glance, they had eyebrows and eyes, but at a closer look, they were even more terrifying. The flashlight shone from the bottom of the puppet, and the light shone from bottom to top on its face. Because of the uncanny valley effect and the shadow effect of the light, it looked very hideous. In the dark old house, it was even scarier. But Nick was like seeing a familiar friend. He put his arm around the puppet's neck, if it could still be counted as a neck. Nick smelled a strange smell on the dummy. He sniffed it a few times, then pulled out a dagger and tore open the pillow cover, revealing the figure made of straw. He stabbed the dummy with the dagger and found that the straw was wrapped in lime, like the dried internal organs of an animal. There was also sulfur. That was the smell of sulfur he had just smelled. Nick quickly and carefully searched the room. There was nothing inside, but he found a few smaller dolls. He came to the next room. This time, he was prepared, but when he opened the door, he was shocked by the dummy hanging at the door. There was a rope around the dummy's neck, and it was hanging at the door through the ceiling light. This time, the dummy was much more detailed. It was a plastic model. Its hands were twisted behind its back, and its neck was slanted. Nick had a strange feeling that this dummy was different from the one in the previous room. Although the dummy in the previous room looked like a dead object, this one, although much more detailed, gave Nick a feeling that it was alive. When he opened the door, Nick swore on his identity as the king of secret agents that he would never confuse a dummy and a corpse. The people he had killed and the corpses he had seen were way more than the dummies the average person had seen. But this time, he got it mixed up. He almost thought it was a hanging corpse. That was why he was shocked. Nick studied the dummy carefully. He noticed that there was a unique life force in the dummy. In other words, it was artistic. At a glance, there was no difference, but Nick was sure that if he showed it to the artists, they would be able to see the life force in the dummy. In other words, a normal dummy was just a prop, but this one here was like a work of art. Works of art usually gave people a vague feeling, showing something inner and alive. Nick noticed this. He saw the dummy struggling in the air. It was afraid, releasing the tension in its heart. It appeared at the door as if it was guarding against something. Then the thing opened the door and came in. It was suspended in the air, struggling, resisting the thing. Then it was devoured and eroded. At this point, Nick suddenly felt that the feeling of touching the dummy had changed. It was no longer the stiff and inelastic plastic. Instead, it was cold and slippery, like human skin without any warmth. A thick stench came from his mouth and nose. Nick felt the dummy that he was holding on to start pressing against him. Its hands were grabbing onto him. But he still had the time to observe the room. This was a room that someone had lived in. There were traces of human activity here not long ago. Countless small details showed that. Nick believed in his observation. At this time, the cold and slippery body had slid into his chest. It was like a soaked corpse that was pulled out and then pressed against him. Nick had felt the touch of all kinds of corpses. Male, female, old, young, burned to death, drowned, committed suicide, murdered, rotten, fresh. At that moment, his heart did not waver. In fact, he had the urge to hug it and sleep. However, his rationality stopped him from doing something so insane. So, Nick had no choice but to insert his large hands into the mannequin's hair. He felt around the neck where the collarbone was. Then, with a slight twist of his hands, the mannequin's head was pulled off. He held the mannequin's head in his hands like he was holding a basketball and made a shooting pose. The black man's big hands could hold a basketball firmly in his hands. Compared to that, a small woman's head was nothing. He threw the doll's head, which bounced off the wall and was caught by Nick's hand. He immediately performed a series of shooting moves, dribbling the ball, taking 3 steps to the blue line, and shooting a 3-pointer from afar. The mannequin's hair tangled around his hands like it was protesting something. Chen Eng's voice came from behind him. The way he looked at Nick was strange, like he was looking at a pervert. "How long do you plan to play this game? You've finished your inspection?" Nick was surprised. "I'm not as slow or as interested as you are," Chen Eng said. "There are mannequins in every room, and they are made of various materials. However, there are traces of someone living in one of the rooms, and the mannequin in that room is quite strange." Nick hung the mannequin's head on his waist and asked, "It's the same here, what's so strange about it?" "It's a leather mannequin. Based on my experience, it looks like it's made of human skin," Chen Eng said casually. Nick pointed at the mannequin's head on his waist and said, "This one here seems to be able to move. Also," Nick hesitated before saying, "it seems like something is looking for something in this room, and the mannequin is like a guard guarding these rooms. Once those things enter, they will grab the mannequin, and the target they are looking for will be able to escape. What do you think those things are looking for?" Chen Eng smiled and said, "Of course it's the people who live in the room, or something that is not a person. 2 rooms that have been occupied before." Nick tossed the mannequin's head up and down. The headless mannequin wriggled and crawled on the ground. This scene could give someone a heart attack, but the two people in the room did not seem to care. Chapter 11:10. Before walking out of the room, Chernong glanced at the doll's head hanging on Nick's waist and had to remind him, "Throw that thing away." "Why?" Nick was puzzled. "Didn't you call me here to let me see these things with my own eyes? I still want to bring it back to the police station. Put this head back on the poor man." Chernong sighed. "We're here to investigate, not to demolish the house. If you do this, it'll be hard for me to explain to the two owners." Nick smiled. "But they're not the owners, right? They're just two bandits who took over this house and turned it into their devil's den, devouring the innocent people they've lured here one after another." Chernong snatched the head from Nick's hand and put it back on the plastic doll. He walked out of the room with a flashlight. The corridor was dark, and Chernong shone the flashlight around. They checked the rooms on the first floor one by one and found another room with traces of someone living in it. There was also a doll that was being tortured inside. It had been broken into pieces, and the various parts of its body were hidden in the corner of the room. It was a Barbie doll. It was only about 40 centimeters tall, and it had already been torn to pieces. Nick took out its head from under the bed. In Nick's hand, the big moving eyes blinked. Suddenly, there was a little girl's laughter in the quiet room. It was the kind of voice that a 6- or 7-year-old child's voice had yet to change. The sound came from the corridor. After hearing it, Chernong quickly opened the door. They saw a petite figure in a white dress flash past the corridor. She was wearing a Golden Age ladylike outfit. She quickly ran down the corridor and disappeared around the corner. Nick asked very calmly, "What do you think that thing is?" "Relax, Nick," Chernong said calmly. "Maybe she's just playing hide-and-seek with us." There was nothing unusual in the next few rooms. When they reached the room at the end of the corridor, they circled back. This room was close to the stairs. When Nick and Chernong came in, they realized that this was a room that the couple often used, so they had tacitly left it for last. Inside, there were some very ordinary things. If there was anything different, it would be that there was a little more life in it. There were many old photos on the cabinet next to the door, and some small ornaments, bronze peacocks, old alarm clocks, oil paintings hanging on the wall. Chernong picked up the photo frame that contained the old photos. The black and white photos were quite old. They had already turned yellow, and the paper was starting to become brittle. In the photo were two young children dressed in the clothes of the last century, which some people call the Golden Age. Nick immediately noticed the white dress the girl was wearing in the photo. He opened his mouth. "Isn't this the child who was playing with us earlier?" Chernong opened the drawer at the bottom of the cabinet. There were many old things inside, but Chernong noticed a black leather book at first glance. He took out the small black leather book and sat down on the chair next to him to flip through it. The beginning was very concise and clear. "Quitting my job as a nurse and coming to Taribo Parish as a caregiver was probably one of the craziest decisions of my life. My friends all say that I'm crazy. Taribo Parish is notorious locally because of its religion, ignorance, and conservatism. But I can't stand the coldness of the hospital anymore. When we send away the patients, it looks like we're throwing away the garbage that we don't need at home. I've decided to do something more meaningful. After all, I'm only 25. What's wrong with a change?" Chernong continued to read. As he skimmed through some meaningless words, a familiar name suddenly appeared in the middle. "Lawyer Luke is a little too passionate toward the mistress here. It's like they're having an affair." Reading this, Nick said in a low voice, 25 years old and Lawyer Luke. "We seem to have found her old diary. 25-year-old Caroline Ellis looks completely different from the Caroline Ellis we've met. Does time really polish people like that?" Chernong continued to read. "My employers are Violet and Ben Devrios. Ben is seriously ill. He's bedridden after a stroke, so Madame Violet hired me to take care of him at a high price. But Ben saw that I was in pain, and his eyes seemed to be saying something to me. After a long internal monologue, the diary said, The previous owners of this house were a brother and sister, Martin and Grace. They were the children of a banker, and they inherited this mansion from their parents. But the two of them lived alone and never married. If you ask me, a man and a woman, even if they were biological siblings, living together for the rest of their lives wouldn't raise any good suspicions. God forgive me. I shouldn't have thought so dirty. Nick picked up the old photo on the table. They should be Martin and Grace, but another photo fell out from behind the frame. Nick picked it up and saw that it was still a photo of Martin and Grace when they were young, but behind them stood a black couple. They stood behind the siblings like servants, and behind the photo were written, Father Justine and Mother Circe. Nick chuckled. Black servants again. Did you know? Many rich white Americans grew up under the care of black servants. They called them father, mother, uncle, aunt, but they didn't hesitate to sell them. Just like Uncle Tom. Have you read Gone with the Wind? In that book, there are those loyal black servants. They are written as if they are part of the family, but when they turn around, they can cruelly abuse their family. I bet. Justine's father and Circe's mother didn't have a good ending. Chen-Ong smiled. That's not necessarily true. Sometimes, the identity of the torturer and the victim can be switched. It depends on which side is more evil. The diary told a story at the end, a story that might have something to do with the strangeness of the mansion. While Caroline was taking care of Ben, she gradually felt that the old house was strange. Strange things often happened here, and the two old people who lived here were also very strange. Ben often rejected his wife's approach. One rainy night, he tried to escape by jumping out the window, but he fell in the yard. He was a stroke victim. Caroline found that he had written in mud on the bedsheet, "Help." So Caroline had a terrible guess. Maybe Madame Violet had poisoned Ben and caused him to have a stroke. Madame Violet and Luke, the lawyer, had an ambiguous relationship. Ben had a stroke in the attic, but Violet claimed that there was a door in the attic that they had never opened, the attic again. Finally, Caroline retold a story that Madame Violet had told her. The mansion was originally built by a rich banker. He had two daughters, Martin and Grace, and they were taken care of by a black couple. Needless to say, they were Justine's father and Circe's mother. Their children trusted their Justine's father and Circe's mother very much. But one day, after the adults went out to a banquet, they came back without seeing the two children. So they began to look around, and finally found the two children and their black servant in the attic, who were performing a witchcraft ritual. Although the two children claimed that they wanted to learn witchcraft, the adults did not give the two black servants a chance to speak. They angrily dragged the two black servants downstairs, and a group of white elites hung them on a tree and burned them to death. But later, perhaps because of retribution, the banker suddenly killed his wife and committed suicide, leaving his property to the two children. This might be the origin of all the strange phenomena. Nick sneered. Looks like you lost. I knew that 3K gang couldn't do anything good. That's not necessarily true. Chen-Ong said. The Madame Violet in this diary is full of suspicion. How credible is the story she told? Nick said calmly. We will find out the truth eventually. Also, what are our stakes? There doesn't seem to be anything suspicious about Caroline in the diary. Instead, the previous owners of this house, Violet and Ben Devriox, are like a woman who murdered her husband and a poor, tortured victim. Ben, who had a stroke, even asked Caroline for help, but the words on the bedsheet mysteriously disappeared after Caroline complained to Luke's lawyer. Nick analyzed. Maybe Caroline herself had a mental illness, and everything was just her delusion. Then Luke's lawyer found out about this, controlled her, murdered the two old people, and seized their property? Later in the diary, Caroline gradually believed in witchcraft. She began to write some local mysterious rumors, and just as Nick had guessed, her mental state was deteriorating. Both Caroline and Madame Violet were normal in the diary, or at least that was how they looked. But the Caroline that Chun Ong and the rest saw was a reserve killer. Her mental state was close to that of a lunatic, and her whole person was gloomy and scary. In the end, Caroline's mental state was very bad. She did not dare to write more clearly in the diary, but vaguely mentioned some strange concepts. She used a pen to copy many materials and rituals. Among them were sulfur, lime, blood, hair, and seemed to be preparing a strange witchcraft ritual. She also mentioned a local legend about witchcraft. There was a kind of witchcraft that could grant immortality. As long as a living person was sacrificed, they could obtain the rest of their life. Chapter 11-12. It was late at night. Chun Ong and Nick were still in the corridor on the second floor. They heard a rustling sound coming from the bathroom on the second floor, where they had placed the mirror. It sounded like the sound of clothes rubbing against the ground, as if someone was crawling on the ground. Chun Ong turned to look at Nick and said, "According to tradition, we should listen more secretly in the room." Nick nodded. "Good idea." Then, the two of them quickly returned to Chun Ang's room and stood at the door to listen carefully to the sounds in the corridor. The couple's bedroom was just a corner away from Chun Ang's guest room, and the bathroom was between them. Water dripped on the bathroom floor, making an almost undetectable sound. But the people here had very sharp ears, so they could hear it clearly. They could even judge the direction and distance of the sound. There were two things moving in the bathroom. One of them was crawling on the ground, its clothes rubbing against the ground, making rustling sounds. The other did not make any footsteps, but there was water dripping from its body. It seemed like its feet were not touching the ground, so they could only judge by the sound of water dripping. It walked out of the bathroom and the door opened. Soon, the rustling sound turned into the sound of clothes rubbing against the carpet. They seemed to be looking for something, and the rustling sound approached the direction of Chun Ang's room. It would always sound for a while, and then it would be quiet for a while. It was very rhythmic. Nick silently counted the time between the sounds. He judged the distance between the walking and stopping by the sound. That was the distance between the doors. The thing crawled to the door of each bedroom, stayed there for a while, and then continued to crawl to the next bedroom. Nick used a tactical hand gesture to signal to Chun Ong, "They're looking." Chun Ong replied, "They should be looking for someone. Do you think they can tell the difference between us and the person they're looking for?" The two of them fell silent. The rustling sound came closer and closer. It was already next door, Nick's room. This time, it stayed a little longer, as if sensing that something was wrong in the room. Then, there was the sound of nails scratching against the door. It was not loud, but it was very obvious in the dark. After a long time, the sound of nails scratching the door disappeared. What followed was a long, long silence. It was so quiet that Chun Ong and Nick could hear the sound of water dripping on the other side. The dripping sound would also linger in each room for a while. They seemed to be searching separately. The sound of dripping water was easy to distinguish, because once it stopped at the door of a room for a while, the sound of dripping water would become the dripping sound of a drop of water falling into a puddle. Nick took out his pen and wrote something in the little notebook he carried with him. Chun Ong leaned forward to take a look. It was calculating the height of the water droplet from the ground based on the time and volume of the sound. It was not difficult to calculate. Based on the sound of the thing moving, one could calculate its speed. Then, based on the landing point of the water droplet and the time between when it stopped, one could calculate how high the water droplet was falling from. This was junior high mathematics, but the prerequisite was that one's ears and experience could accurately detect the sound of the water droplet. This ability to discern the location of the target through listening was not something an ordinary person could do. Chun Ong glanced at it and instantly gave Nick a look of disdain. Did he even need to use a pen to calculate this? Chun Ong calculated in his mind and found out that the height of the water droplet was about 1.4 meters, and the ceiling of the second floor was only 2.8 meters high. 1.4 meters. Chun Ong repeated the number in his mind. This is not the height of a normal person. Even if the thing's head is touching the ceiling, the tip of its feet or the corner of its clothes, the water droplet will fall from the lowest point and it will be 4 meters from the ground. Chun-Ong calculated the falling speed of the water droplets on the thing's body and calculated the different heights of the falling point. Then, he took the smallest value. That should be the water droplet falling from the tip of its feet. No, it was not a water droplet. Chun-Ong had calculated the weight of the water droplet based on the acceleration, and then based on the weight of the water droplet, he calculated the surface tension of the liquid. That was not pure water. It was also not blood. As for what kind of liquid it was, Chun-Ong was more inclined to oil. If it was really that thing, would it be a midget or a child? At that moment, the thing next door moved. Chun-Ong began to smell a burning smell approaching. It was the smell of burning and rotting, the smell of a corpse. It was still crawling on the ground. He could see a shadow appear at the door, peeking out from the gap of the door. The thing seemed to be lying in the gap of the door below, looking inside. Chun-Ong raised his head and saw that Nick had already leaned against the walls on both sides and was sticking to the ceiling in the corner. His 4 limbs were supporting the walls on both sides of the corner, and he was at ease. He even had the time to stretch out a hand and make a shushing gesture to Chun-Ong Ha. You still say you're the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. Venom's identity has been exposed. Nick, you still say you don't have spider sense. Chun-Ong stood in place, and the thing seemed to have seen his feet. It began to use its claws to grab the door and climb up. The sound of its nails scratching on the door was a little irritating. The thing climbed to the position of the keyhole and then looked inside. A blood-red eyeball appeared opposite the keyhole, and Chun-Ong stood with his back against it. His body was like a puppet on a string, posing in a classic Michael Jackson pose. His body was tilted 45 degrees, facing the floor, and his hair fell down to cover his eyes. His body was so stiff that it didn't look like a human at all. His whole body was full of mechanical rigidity and numbness, and there was not even a trace of a living person on his body. The thing seemed to be quite curious. It stared at Chun-Ong for a long time, and its eyes were full of curiosity. Although the glass of the eyeball was burned a little yellow and turbid, the emotion that was revealed still made its eyes a lot more vivid. Nick inexplicably felt that it was a little cute. Human instincts determine that they can't resist the ignorant eyes of small animals, the childlike state, the instinct to protect the cubs. This is the source of cuteness. It turns out that as long as the eyes are in place, anything can be cute. The thing looked for a while, and it seemed to be really curious. But it still slid down the keyhole with reluctance, and then continued to climb to the room next to it. After it left the door, Chun-Ang's body instantly stood upright, as if he was pulled up by a string. Nick also quietly climbed down from the corner of the wall. The dripping thing had already passed the door of the wizard couple's bedroom. No one knew what the couple did, but the thing didn't seem to notice. It stayed at the door for a while and then left. The two of them met at the door of the stairs outside the corridor. There was also an old rusty mechanical elevator for people who couldn't move easily. When Chun-Ong and Nick came, they paid special attention to the elevator because it was too old. Luke's lawyer also told them that it was installed for the convenience of the paralyzed Ben. After Ben passed away, they didn't remove it, but no one had used it for 10 years. Now it seemed that Luke wasn't being honest. It was used every night. Just as the two things were about to start the elevator, they suddenly heard some whispers. The voices were very soft, almost like a few wisps of air. Then the two things stopped for a while, and started to move towards Chun-Ang's room. Nick subconsciously raised his head, and saw that Chun-Ong was already supporting himself on the ceiling in the corner. His body was curled into a ball, like the shadow in the corner of the wall. This time, the two little things moved faster, and soon they would reach their door. Nick gave Chun-Ong the middle finger. He had no choice but to unbutton his shirt and put on his coat to stand where Chun-Ong was. Leaning forward, he lowered his body bit by bit with difficulty. He relied on his ankles, and his calf muscles were tight. He couldn't do it as freely as Chen. Without the help of the mechanism, he could only do it with his muscles. Even Nick was in a difficult position. Fortunately, he gritted his teeth and forced himself to do it. The dripping sound stopped at the door, and so did the dripping sound. Then there was a very soft knock on the door. The knocking sounded at the same time, as if someone was knocking with both hands at the same time. Who would be that bored? The thought just flashed across Nick's mind when another image popped into his mind. A body hanging from the ceiling approached the door. His toes shook, and he knocked on the door, making 2 soft knocks. Someone looked down through the crack in the door above, but he saw nothing. It only saw a black shadow in front of the bed. The thing was confused, and the whispering started again. The 2 things seemed to be arguing. Their voices were a little louder, but it still sounded like they were hissing from their throats. The thing on the ground seemed to be in disbelief, and the sound of its nails scratching the door came again. It moved closer to the keyhole, wanting to see the strange doll again, but there was only a black shadow. A cute scream of disbelief came from the other side of the door. Chen quietly moved to the ceiling next to the window. He used a small mirror to reflect a small part of the moonlight onto Nick. Instantly, the black shadow dissolved. Nick, who was standing at an anti-gravity angle at a 45-degree angle, was exposed to the moonlight. A small scream came from the other side of the door. The 2 things looked at Nick's huge, dark body through the gap of the door and the keyhole, which was comically facing the floor at a 45-degree angle. The 2 little things were whispering to each other again. They seemed to be discussing something excitedly. If Chen Eng's performance was as precise and stable as a puppet's, then Nick's performance was quite funny, like a clumsy clown. Fortunately, the 2 things were really easy to fool. They didn't care about the replacement. They watched for a while and left. After a while, the creaking sound of the elevator was heard. In the room of the 2 wizards, Madame Caroline suddenly said, "They're a little early today." The doll in the attic didn't respond. "Maybe the doll is broken again," Mr. Luke said. "Go get a new one tomorrow morning. We're running out of time." Justine. Caroline called the other person's name. The first night passed just like that. Soon, the sky turned bright, and the rooster crowed in the courtyard. Chapter 11:13. Early in the morning, Caroline first got up to check the attic. She walked up the ladder, took out the master key, and opened the door of the attic. It was just dawn, and the light in the attic was very dim. There were many things piled up on both sides. Most of them were all kinds of puppets. There were hideous statues, human figures covered in white cloth, scarecrows made of grass, and sewn puppets. All kinds of puppets were piled up on both sides, their expressions ferocious and weird. However, these creepy puppets seemed to give Caroline peace of mind. She smiled as she walked past the puppets. The shelf opposite her that was holding the junk had fallen down. There was a door behind the shelf. The door was ajar, and the shelf that was leaning against the door had been pushed down as if something had pushed the door. The force of the shaking was very strong, and the area in front of the door was a mess. A wax figure stood in front of the door. Her neck was twisted in a strange way. The wax was covered with a layer of dust, making it look less lifelike. Otherwise, it would be too scary. Some of the wax figure had melted. She should have been posing like a dancer, but now she looked like a dead person who had been hanged by something. Her limbs were tightly attached to her body, and they were twisted as if they were fractured. Her expression was very scary. Like the other weird puppets, this wax figure was very vivid and had a strange life force. When Caroline saw the wax figure, she suddenly breathed a sigh of relief. She went to straighten the shelf and leaned the wax figure against the door. She whispered, "Thank God we have you, otherwise they wouldn't be able to come out. Otherwise, I really don't know what to do. I dreamed of them again. They were looking for me. In the dream, they found us. They are approaching us. They are getting closer and closer. If they find us, we are dead. No, death is much better than this." Caroline said something, and as if she had regained her courage, she stood up. "Someone is watching us." 2 hotheads came. "They should be from the FBI," she sneered. "But they don't know what they are facing." With trembling hands, Carolyn took out a white candle from the cabinet next to her. She lit the candle and let the wax drip on the wax figure. She dipped her hand in the wax oil and softly muttered in Benin's native language as she smeared the wax oil on the figure. She twitched and rolled her eyes from time to time. His hands were shaking like a Parkinson's patient. After completing the series of rituals, Caroline's face was pale as if her blood had been drawn. She was covered in sweat and looked even older. With her back hunched, Caroline slowly turned around and prepared to leave the attic. The wax figure behind her opened its eyes strangely and stared at her back with extreme resentment. Caroline seemed to have sensed something and quickly turned around, but the scene just now was like an illusion. The wax figure's eyes were still closed, and the wax was still intact. It still looked like a girl who was struggling to get entangled by something and was on the verge of death. Afraid, Caroline backed away, turned quickly, and stumbled down the stairs. Lawyer Luke was scraping the grease off the carpet with a knife. When he saw Caroline running down, he called to her, "Slow down. What's the rush? The attic won't be able to stop them for much longer," Caroline said. "They're even stronger here. We have to get out of here and wait for them to weaken. Only then will we have a chance to deal with them." Luke suddenly raised his head and asked, "Is there any grease in the attic?" Caroline suddenly said, "There's no grease in the attic." "Then where did they come from?" The two ran anxiously, following the traces of grease. When they passed by Chen Eng's room, they found that there was more yellow and white grease at the door of his room than in the other rooms. "It seems that they've been discovered." Caroline showed a mysterious smile and said, "I hope they weren't frightened last night." When they passed by Chen Eng's room, the door suddenly opened. Chen Ong stood at the door with a pale face, looking at the two. When he looked down and saw the grease on the carpet, his face suddenly twisted, and his face became even paler. "Yesterday," Chen Ong hesitated. "Last night seemed to be a bit lively." He stared at the carpet as if he wanted to see through it, and asked in a weak voice, "Do you have a cat?" Caroline replied excitedly, "No, I don't like that thing. I'm allergic to animal hair." It doesn't seem normal for a witch to not like cats. Nick's door also suddenly opened. He stood at the door, his black eyes shining, staring at Caroline and Luke as if they were suspects. Nick glanced at Chen Ong from the corner of his eye. Seeing his embarrassed appearance, he cursed in his heart, "Drama queen." Nick said frankly, "Something was scratching at our door last night." Caroline deliberately hid her hands behind her back. She noticed that Chen Ong was secretly staring at her fingernails. She laughed in her heart, but her face showed a somewhat inscrutable expression. She said, "Maybe it was a mouse. Without a cat, it's inevitable that some small animals will breed in such a big house." But Nick pressed, "A mouse can't climb that high. It can't climb from the bottom of the door to the handle. It can't even open its eyes and look inside. Also, this room is indeed very old and very big, but I notice that there are no annoying rodents, not even bugs. I've heard that some wizards like to use sulfur to perform their witchcraft. When they're too poisoned, they'll be covered in the sulfur smell. Even bugs won't come close to them." Caroline saw the grease at the door and became impatient again. "Old houses are like this. There are all kinds of strange problems. Now I'm going to clean my carpet. Breakfast is in an hour, downstairs in the dining room." She heard her husband Luke roar in the bathroom and immediately rushed over. As soon as she entered the bathroom, she saw another reflection of herself on the wall. It was a dark-skinned, sharp-eyed woman who looked very capable, a black woman. Beside the black woman was also a black man in an old waiter and servant's tuxedo. Caroline's body went cold. She screamed, "Mirror! Why is there a mirror?" Caroline went up and smashed the mirror. She hurriedly pulled a carpet from the side, and wrapped the broken pieces of the mirror in it. She rolled it into a ball and gave it to her husband. Then she quickly walked to Chen Ang's room and asked them, "Mirror? Did you bring the mirror in the bathroom?" Chen Ang looked up in surprise. "What mirror?" Caroline stared at him as if she wanted to gouge out his flesh. "Don't let me find out who did this. In this house, no mirrors are allowed." She was almost hysterical as she roared like a crazy woman. Nick asked, "Why can't there be a mirror? Did someone do anything in front of a mirror? Or did the mirror let you see your ugly face and see the truth?" He leaned forward and whispered, "What are you afraid of?" Chapter 11:14. Facing the aggressive Caroline, Nick suddenly refused to back down. He said in a low voice, "Didn't you already check it? When we first moved in, I found an excuse to go to the toilet and found that even the bathroom in this house didn't have a mirror. At that time, you should have been rummaging through our luggage. None of this escaped my eyes. I'm an FBI agent, Nick Fury." Nick took out his ID and showed it to the two. "Are you sure you want to search the belongings of a public official?" Nick said. "I don't think you have the authority." Chen Ong continued, "We are here to investigate the case that happened 20 years ago. I remember that it was you who called the police, Miss Caroline. You called the police and claimed that you were being persecuted by witchcraft in this house. However, when our police arrived, you said that nothing had happened. You were too nervous at night, so you were hallucinating. Then, Mrs. Violet suddenly had a stroke. She even left this house to you." Chen Ong continued, "From then on, the local police began to pay attention to you. If Violet and me had died, the police would have immediately launched an investigation. But they lived for another 10 years, which was really not easy for two old people who had a stroke, so the police ignored you. Until the FBI noticed this case. Caroline's aunt called the police before she passed away. She was already delirious at that time, and the doctors and her family suspected that there was something wrong with her, so they didn't pay attention to it. She said that Caroline's soul told her in a dream that someone had killed her and taken away her body. We later found out that in the letter that Caroline's aunt had sent 20 years ago, Caroline had written down some of her doubts at that time. She suspected that her employer had poisoned the patient she was taking care of. She even sent a bottle of medicine and asked her aunt to help her examine it. However, her aunt neglected this matter and still kept the bottle of potion. We later examined the potion and found that it was not an anticoagulant or stroke medicine, but a local herbal preparation. It contained hallucinogenic plants and some neurotoxins. Because the ingredients were very complicated, we did not know what they were used for. But I found a familiar ingredient, tetrodotoxin. In Haiti's primitive religion, this toxin was used to create a terrible witchcraft product. Witches would secretly feed a powder containing tetrodotoxin to living people and turn them into resurrected corpses to enslave them. An appropriate amount of tetrodotoxin can indeed cause a stroke. The primitive religion in Haiti later spread to the United States. In Louisiana, it was reorganized by the legendary witch Lavelle and established the Voodoo sect. Nick nodded and said, "Therefore, we reasonably suspect that this case from 20 years ago is related to cults and witchcraft. So, you think that we killed Violet and me, and used the voodoo cult's medicine to cause them to have a stroke. Then, we joined hands and occupied their property?" Luke said. "That inheritance was also an excuse for your investigation, a lie, right?" "No, the inheritance is real," Chen Ong said. "But its owner clearly wants us to investigate whether the woman using her niece's name is her." Lawyer Nick said, "What does that mean?" Chen Ong replied, "It means that we suspect that Mrs. Caroline might just be someone using Caroline's identity. Our reasonable speculation is that someone might have occupied her body, used her identity, enjoyed her youth, and survived. It's as if we suspect that Lawyer Luke is not Lawyer Luke. We've interviewed a lot of people who knew you and found out that after that incident, you've been living in seclusion and cut ties with a lot of people who knew you. And you, Lawyer Luke, your subsequent cases have been handled very poorly. This is not something a young and promising lawyer should do. Ms. Caroline, your friend who is familiar with local witchcraft has long suspected this. Enough, Caroline yelled. Her hair was disheveled, and she looked a little crazy. She shouted, I've had enough of your nonsense. Lawyer Luke hugged his wife and asked coldly, I can't believe that the FBI believes in witchcraft. No. Chen Ong smiled. We don't believe in witchcraft. We just suspect that your body has been swapped. This kind of thing can be scientifically proven. Nick flashed a set of white teeth. After all, aliens have appeared in New York, and the Norse gods have come to Earth. These kinds of absurd things have already happened. It doesn't seem that impossible to take over a person's body, right? There are many technologies that can do this. Besides, what if you guys are aliens hiding on Earth? The two fake FBI agents did not hide their suspicions at all. The two wizards were caught red-handed. They had mixed feelings about this. In the past, the witchcraft wizards of the voodoo cult could always rely on their anti-science and anti-common sense skills to escape the net of the law. But now, common sense itself had been subverted. The law enforcers did not believe in witchcraft, but they were convinced that aliens and extraterrestrial technology existed in this world. Then, the two wizards were in trouble. I don't want to listen to your nonsense anymore. Caroline trembled. Now, get out of here. This is your legal right, Miss Caroline. Nick smiled. But according to the latest Alien Threat Safety Protection Act, if there is a reasonable suspicion of an extraterrestrial threat, we have the right to take Level 2 surveillance measures and apply to the judge for further investigation. You can kick us out, but next time we will visit you with a search warrant from the judge. Lawyer Luke's face darkened. Don't stop them, Caroline. We didn't do anything. God is watching us. Let them investigate. They don't need a search warrant. God will prove that we are innocent. That will save us some trouble. He glared at the two of them, then turned around and returned to his room with his wife. As soon as the two of them returned to the room, Lawyer Luke made a shushing gesture and then whispered in a Haitian dialect, There's a problem this time. They found out part of the truth, but they don't believe in witchcraft, and they're pestering us. Caroline said fiercely, After that incident, our witchcraft has changed. Now, even if they don't believe in witchcraft, we can still curse them. No, Circe. Lawyer Luke said, if they don't believe in witchcraft, it's not a problem to complete some insignificant witchcraft and curses. But if they want to complete the blessing of Lavelle, we can't do it. Queen Lavelle bless us, Caroline said. We must hurry up. They don't believe in witchcraft, so we have to prove it to them. You mean? Lawyer Luke said, our abilities are not strong enough. If we want to make them fear us, we have to borrow their power. However, we can't control them. They have been looking for us, wanting to take revenge on us. With the power left behind by Queen Lavelle, we can only protect ourselves. If we let them out, the situation will be out of control. We can only race against time. Caroline said. Let them out and let those two hotheads feel fear and take the initiative to complete the blessing of Lavelle. Before they find us, we have to run far away. If we don't complete the blessing of Lavelle, no matter where we run, we won't be able to escape their pursuit. Luke felt fear. He trembled and said, if we let them out, we'll be in danger. And who can guarantee that those two hotheads won't be killed by them? That's even better, Caroline said. Without them in the way, we can trick a few ordinary people into coming in at any time. Luke was silent for a long time before he raised his head and said, What are you going to do? Caroline took out a cigarette and lit it up. Sitting on a chair, she took a deep puff and slowly exhaled a ring of smoke. Take out the mirrors in the attic. Tonight, let them stay on the second floor. Put the mirrors in their rooms, as well as the rooms around them. With them around, those things shouldn't have time to find us. Chen Ong stood at the door of their room with a mysterious smile. There was a button-sized tool on the door. This small thing that looked like a suction cup sensed the sounds inside, then amplified them, converted them into electromagnetic signals, and sent them to the earphones in Chen Ong and Nick's ears. Nick turned on the automatic translation software, and Chen Ong could understand the Haitian dialect directly. The two of them looked at each other, removed the suction cup, and left the room. "Something interesting might happen tonight," Nick said. "That's what you want me to see, right? Install a few mirrors downstairs." Chen Ong turned to look at Nick. "I think you should have a way to prevent them from finding out. All the secrets will be solved tonight." From that moment onwards, the things that happened in this house took a more interesting direction. Each of the people here was more capable of courting death than the other. This caused the originally controllable situation to develop in a direction that no one knew what the consequences would be. Chen Ong used the silver mirror reaction in the house to manufacture a small number of mirrors. Nick was responsible for hiding it in a place that no one could find. On the other side, Caroline and her husband came to the attic and opened the door. Both sides moved at the same time. Sometimes, Nick and Caroline would walk past each other with a mirror in their arms, separated by a corridor. Behind the door of the attic were dozens of mirrors of various sizes. There were also various witchcraft materials, but those materials had mutated. Flesh grew out of the masks made of gorilla skulls. Dolls with eyes and mouths sewn on them revealed a creepy smile. Human faces appeared on the leaves and flowers of the plants that grew out of the flower pots on the windowsill. The faces were even screaming. The walls and the floor were covered in charred marks as if they had been set on fire. Under the charred walls were blood vessels and muscle tissues that squirmed as if they were alive. Chapter 11:15. Dinner was at 9 o'clock in the evening. Because of the falling out with the Carolines, Nick had to personally go to the kitchen to make 1 or 2 sandwiches. He and Chen Ong sat at the small dining table in the room and had a simple dinner. The small dining table was not big. The two of them sat at both ends, and a mirror was placed in the middle, which took up all the space. Nick took a deep bite of the sandwich and swallowed it with a pickled cucumber. "I won't ask you why you have to place a mirror when we are eating." Nick bit the sandwich and said vaguely, "When are we going to watch the show?" Chen Ong raised his head, looking a little confused. Nick was speechless. "You were the one who asked me to install the mirror. Don't tell me you forgot. I hid the mirror in all kinds of places they would never think of. It will be late at night soon. If there is really something in the mirror, then there will be a lot of fun downstairs." After Chen Ong finished eating, he wiped his hands on the napkin next to the table and said, "Don't rush. In order to better understand what is in the mirror, why don't we play a few games first?" Nick said, "What games?" "It is not popular here in America, but in Asia, our occult culture is very popular to communicate with the dead. It is not like the communication of spirit mediums here. Here in America, we trust professionals more. In Asia, we usually invite a few friends to explore the secrets of ghosts and gods. In this aspect, we are very adventurous, which is commonly known as courting death. This time, we will play a game that is especially popular in East Asian culture." Chen Ong took out a piece of paper and a pen and placed it on the table. "Pen spirit. Pen spirit." Nick repeated the English translation of pen spirit. He had no idea what was so scary about elves. In European and American culture, elves were naughty creatures like Peter Pan. Dead spirit divination. Chen Ong changed the translation. "Here are the rules. Normally, this game requires some complicated rituals, such as preparing tributes, summoning dead spirits, and attaching themselves to this pen. However, because the dead spirit we need to summon is very active this time, these rituals are unnecessary. Now, we will write 2 words on a piece of paper, yes and no. After the divination is done, we will hold the pen together and ask the question. Where the pen tip moves to will be the answer given by the dead spirit." Chen Ong wrote 2 words on the paper, then held the pen with one hand and placed the tip of the pen in the middle of the paper. "Oh right." Chen Ong took a piece of black cloth and covered his hand. "I've made some changes to the game. During the game, our hand holding the pen will be covered by a piece of black cloth." "What a weird East Asian divination game," Nick mumbled. But he still reached out a hand and held the pen together with Chen Ong. The atmosphere suddenly became a little awkward. After a moment of silence, Nick said, "Did your game consider this situation?" Chen Ang's expression was a little strange. "This game is usually played by girls in school. The creator of the game doesn't seem to have considered the size of a black person's palm. You just need to pinch the pen shaft with 2 fingers. After Chen Ong said that, he bent his index and middle fingers to pinch the bottom end of the pen shaft. Nick used the side of his thumb and index finger to pinch the top end. At this time, a cold, slender hand suddenly reached out and grabbed the middle end of the pen shaft. Chen Ong and Nick watched as the end of the black cloth near the mirror began to bulge. It was as if the person in the mirror had reached out and inserted a hand. "I think we can start the divination now." Nick cleared his throat and said, "I want to know, does the Holy Shield know where the 5th seal is?" As soon as he said that, the pen shaft did not move. The hand did not seem to have any intention of moving the pen shaft. But after a while, the pen tip began to move slowly. Nick felt a force pulling the pen tip to the no position. Nick suddenly slammed his right hand and stood up. He said angrily, "You're the one who's moving the pen tip. I saw you using force. This divination game is a scam." Chen Ong also slammed the table and stood up. He said loudly, "Because you need to ask a question it knows, idiot." Nick's anger did not subside. "What I need is an answer to a question I don't know. If it can't even answer this, then what kind of divination is it? What use do I have for it? It's just a dead spirit. Don't ask it a question that even the Sorcerer Supreme can't answer with the time gem. If you're so awesome, why don't you ask the omniscient and omnipotent God?" Chen Ong said, "It only knows what happened in this house. Don't make things difficult for it, okay?" Only then did Nick sit down and continue to cover it with the black cloth. He asked, "Were you killed by a wizard?" As soon as he said that, the hand began to exert force. It pulled the pen tip in a certain direction, but Nick did not move the pen. He exerted force, and the pen shaft seemed to be rooted to the ground. The hand pulled twice and realized that it could not move, so it began to pull the pen even harder. The strength it was using now was far beyond that of a normal big man. Unfortunately, Nick had all the strength he could muster. Not even 2 tons of brute force from the infinite formula could hold him back. He gripped it tightly, and no matter how hard that hand pulled, the tip of the pen wouldn't budge. Chen Ong could not stand it anymore. He looked up at Nick and said, "Are you having a tug of war? Show some respect to the pen's spirit. It's about to cry." Only then did Nick loosen his grip. The hand moved the pen tip to the yes position. He answered sincerely, "I just wanted to test its strength. These dead spirits may not have a physical body, but they're very strong. They're like a trained boxer. And they're heavyweight boxers, big, strong men." Chen Ong sighed helplessly. He took out a small box from his back and took out a suit part with an engine, the kind that Stark often used. There were jet thrusters in the palm and small compensating engines in all directions. "A suit part for Miss Potts," Chen Ong explained to Nick. "I brought it with me. I'm going to take it to the spear for maintenance." Chen Ong put on the suit glove and held the pen. He made an inviting gesture to Nick. "Come, let's continue. Are the Carolins in this house the wizards who killed you?" Nick continued to ask. This time, under the threat of Chen Ong holding the suit glove, Nick did not hold the pen. Instead, he started to use the electric shock bracelet made by SHIELD to use a high-voltage discharge to shock the hand. The buzzing sound of the electric current on the pen made by the 3 hands was heard, and the dazzling electric current radiated from the pen tip. It was a Tesla reaction. Chen Ong had no choice but to use a countercurrent to shock Nick until his whole body was convulsing. Seeing the pen stop at the yes position again, Nick's body started to smell burnt. His hair stood up against his scalp, and he twitched from time to time. He crawled up from under the table and said, "It's not afraid of electricity. It's very likely that it won't react to energy attack." He asked again, "Are the two wizards the black servants who once served the banker?" Chen Ong wore the adamantium glove and watched the high-energy laser pass through his hand. The adamantium alloy shell sizzled and sparked, and the black cloth had been cut full of holes by the laser. Nick's 5 fingertips were equipped with a small laser generator, and his right hand held the sunglasses that hung on the bridge of his nose. "It won't be hurt by the laser. So why don't they come out during the day?" Nick's expression was a bit solemn. If that thing was invisible and could not be hurt by physics, which Nick had just confirmed with a knife, could not be hurt by electricity, and did not fear lasers, then most technological means would not work on it. That thing had strength comparable to Hercules, could directly use physical means to interfere with reality, and had a certain degree of intelligence. If it had some special means, then it would be a very difficult enemy to deal with. From a scientific point of view, yes, daytime only means the side of the earth that can receive sunlight, but from a mystical point of view daytime is not that simple. "It has a special meaning," Chen Ong said. "There are 3 elements of mysticism: timing, symbolism, and ritual. For some witchcraft and magic spells, conceptual symbolism is very important. What they need is a metaphysical concept that is formed subjectively above matter. It's the product of human consciousness reflecting reality. It's some elements of information science, some concepts. Yes, they can't come out during the day because most people are afraid of the dark. When human genes were spread, some of the fear of nocturnal predators was engraved in their genes. Those who were afraid of the dark survived, and the genes they carried were also passed down. So, compared to the dark, people think that the day is safe. Light and fire can give them a sense of security. So the concept of safety exists in the day. Human consciousness gives it the meaning of safety, so when we face certain things, it can protect us," Nick said. "But there are many images that give it the concept of protection and safety. I tried it with a cross just now, and it is not afraid of the cross at all. The spirits, formed by different cultural concepts, have different ways of dealing with it," Chen Ong answered. "As the saying goes, believe it, don't believe it, don't believe it. The voodoo cult uses red brick powder to defend against enemies, Catholicism believes that salt can exorcise evil, Japan believes in Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva, and China uses cinnabar to suppress ghosts. Ghosts born from a culture can only be dealt with using the concept unique to that culture. Using a foreign holy object to exorcise the evil of our own country. Using a foreigner's sword to kill our own officials. What kind of logic is that? If you want to know why the ghosts here can't be exorcised using the holy object of Catholicism, then you have to ask those wizards how they created these ghosts." Chen Ong turned to ask the pen spirit, "Do you want revenge?" The pen that no one was holding stood vertically on the paper. Under the control of an invisible force, the tip of the pen slowly moved to the yes. Chen Ong had Nick leave first while he walked to the door with the pen. With his back facing the room, he tossed the pen behind him, and there was no sound behind him. Chen Ong smiled and walked down the stairs. Chapter 11:16. Caroline was lying on the bed, but she didn't close her eyes. She kept them open, looking at the ceiling above her. Luke was lying next to her, and they were listening to the sounds upstairs. There was a doll at the door of their room. It was a dancing wax doll. On the cabinet next to the door there was a paper doll. It was a man and a woman with a paper horse, which had a traditional Chinese style. There was a terror doll hanging on the doorframe, and a Japanese-style geisha doll was placed in the corner. So many dolls with different cultural elements in a foreign-style house formed a strange, incongruous style. All the mannequins were facing the door, as if they were guarding against something trying to break in. At this time, there was a knock on the door, and Chen Eng's voice came from outside. "Are you asleep? If you are, you should be awake now. I found something interesting upstairs, and I think I have to show it to you." Luke sat up. Why is he knocking at this time? Caroline was also surprised. She shouted through the door, "It's too late to think about it. Mr. Detective, if there's anything, let's talk tomorrow." The voice at the door replied, "You'd better open the door. I don't think it can wait until tomorrow." "What can't wait until tomorrow?" Caroline demanded. "Don't disturb us anymore." Chen Eng's voice was still calm. "Because I can't be sure if you can live until tomorrow." Circe. This name caused Caroline to jump up in shock. She turned her head to the side to listen to the sounds coming from outside the door. However, ever since Chen Ong had said those words, he had remained silent. The entire place was silent. Luke stopped Caroline from getting out of bed. "No matter what happens, we can't go out. This house is the safest place. We've opened the door, and now this house is filled with those things. No matter what sounds come from outside, we can't go out. We don't know if the person outside the door is still himself, or if he's a human, or what he is. No matter what he says, Circe, we have to stay calm. It's just a devil's trap. It's very late." Luke said calmly, "Sir, go to sleep." At this time, Nick's voice came from outside the door. He said, "We have a lot of people here who want to see you, Mr. Justine. They want to see their Justine father and Circe mother. Ask them some questions." The latter half of the voice turned into a child's voice. A boy said with a clear voice, "We regard you as our parents. Why do you want to take away our bodies? We used to respect you so much, Mother Circe. No matter what our father did wrong, we have never humiliated or harmed you, but you have chosen to harm us. You made our father burn his child to death with his own hands, and you even used our bodies to carry out the filthy acts of chaos. You purposely let them see all of this and drove our mother crazy. My father guessed the truth and was forced to commit suicide by you." Caroline, or rather, Circe could not help but make a sound. But before she could say a word, Justine, who was carrying Luke's body, covered her mouth. He whispered in her ear, "Don't respond. No matter what you say, it will only make them angry." A girl's high-pitched scream came from the other side of the door. In the room where Justine was, the light bulbs and glass were shattered. It was a very resentful, high-pitched, and ferocious scream from a little girl, echoing in the dark night, but this soul-stealing scream was weakened after passing through the door, which was guarded by the puppets. Circe threw herself into Justine's arms in fear. Justine had to hug her and comfort her. "It's okay. Darling, they can't come in, they can't come in. Tomorrow we can hold the ceremony. Then we can leave this place. They can't catch us. If they are alive, we can get what we want, but if they are dead, we are not afraid. Ever since the door was opened, they have refused to let us go. Justine, it's useless. We can't destroy them. They will pester us endlessly." The witch, Circe, said, "Unless we close the door. But the seal has failed. Are the great wizards in the voodoo sect eating sh*t? Why did they lose such an important seal? The voodoo doll is guarding the door, but once the door is opened, it can only be closed if it wants to close it." "Justine," Circe said in fear, "let's go grab that voodoo doll." The doll left by Queen Lavu, the first voodoo doll, it should have the ability to guard the door. Chen Eng's voice sounded again, "Justine, Circe, you used to be the owners of this house, the black servants hired by the bankers. You should be from Haiti, right? Many black people in Louisiana came from Haiti, and some of them were proficient in witchcraft. You were loyal to Queen Lavu of the voodoo sect. It's normal for the bankers to abuse you. Many rich white people in that era were like this. They treated their servants badly, so you decided to show them a little. It just so happened that although you were young, you had enough of that body. It was too difficult for black people in that era. But it was very easy for you, so you decided to use the soul-snatching witchcraft to seize the bodies of their children so that you could inherit that large amount of wealth. And the bodies you prepared, they trusted you, didn't they? Then you succeeded, and you also got rid of that annoying banker. You occupied this house like a poisonous spider on a spider's web, luring one prey after another into your net. But Justine, it has been a long time. Things will always go wrong. A few weeks ago, the door was opened. The door guarded by the voodoo sect was opened. Some things can come out from behind the door to find you. Those souls who have passed away, those who are unwilling, those who are resentful, those who hate. Justine and Circe, you can rest assured that we didn't find you for those trivial hatred and stories of your past. We only care about how the door was opened, and about the secret behind the door. Circe said in horror, "Who are you?" Her mind flashed back to the scenes one after another. Chen Ong appeared in the study and chatted with them. Chen Ang's background and story automatically appeared in their minds, but they never saw how Chen Ong walked through the door. It was as if he had directly appeared in the study. That night, when she opened the door for another man, the black man, he seemed to have come from afar. But there was no moisture on his bald head. His feet were muddy, and he was wearing a trench coat that seemed to be from the last century. This guy said that he was a bailiff and claimed that he was the FBI, and she actually believed him. Who we are is not important, Chen Ong said slowly. What's important is the secret behind the door. Don't think that this room will always be safe, Chen Ong said mysteriously. In fact, you are trapping yourself in a death trap. Circe sat up in shock. She came to the door and listened suspiciously to the sound behind the door, but there was not even the sound of breathing behind the door. Instead, Luke, who was lying on the bed, heard the sound of breathing beside his ears. He slowly turned around and saw Chen Ong sitting next to his head, but he couldn't even move. Chen Ong dragged out another Luke from under the bed and placed him next to him. Then, he shoved him under the bed. Lawyer Luke lay under the bed, eyes open, staring at the headboard. There was a mirror that was half the height of a person stuck there, and in the mirror, there were several pairs of eyes staring at him. He also saw the young Caroline smiling at him, face to face. Caroline's mouth and eyes were sealed with stitches. She opened her eyes and looked at Justine through the stitches between her eyelids. After nervously checking the door, Circe returned to the bed and lay next to the Luke. This time, it was the real lawyer Luke. Justine, on the other hand, was lying under the bed, listening to his wife lying next to something he did not know. He saw Chen Ong climb into the mirror, and the Caroline in the mirror climbed out to lie next to him. Now, there was a Caroline and Luke on the bed, and a Caroline and Luke under the bed. Chapter 11:17. The conversation between Nick and Chen Ong came from the mirror, and Luke listened carefully. I want to talk to you about the debt of the United States. Nick's voice was very calm. He said to Chen Ong, in March, China, the European Community, and the former Russia talked about the US dollar assets and debt of the Allied countries before the establishment of the Revolutionary Alliance. The Allied countries hold a total of $8 trillion foreign exchange reserves, of which the U.S. national debt is more than $2 trillion. After the establishment of the Revolutionary Alliance, they imposed a financial blockade on the United States and froze this debt. The United States government wanted to negotiate with the Revolutionary Alliance, but you downgraded the diplomatic level with the United States to the representative level. This has caused a lot of trouble for our negotiation. You know, Chen Ong replied, the diplomatic relationship between China and the United States used to be one of the most important diplomatic relationships in the world. China and the United States are major countries, and our communication to avoid misunderstandings is indeed related to the global political situation. But this relationship changed 6 years ago. After China returned to the Revolutionary Alliance, the world political situation changed drastically. It was precisely because of the extremely incorrect response and decision made by the United States during that period that the Revolutionary Alliance and the United States were once close to a state of war. The United States froze all the overseas assets of the Revolutionary Alliance and tried to deny the debt relationship, which was the main culprit for this series of misunderstandings. This led to the decision of the Revolutionary Alliance to break off diplomatic relations with the United States 6 years ago. Recently, in order to show friendship, the Revolutionary Alliance re-established diplomatic relations with the United States at the representative level. During that period, the United States government did make an imprudent diplomatic decision, Nick said, but the Revolutionary Alliance also has to bear the corresponding responsibility. It was because of your rash action of attacking the Pacific Fleet that the situation developed to an irreversible extent. The Revolutionary Alliance never fired the first shot. Chen-Ong pondered for a moment. At least in the internal relations of the Earth, we have never fired the first shot. Outside the Earth, in the galaxy, we rarely fire the first shot. But we will not give the enemy a second chance. When the United States intensified the conflict between the two sides, it was the Revolutionary Alliance who stationed the extraterrestrial fleet in the Earth-Moon orbit to control the situation and avoid the arrival of war. Please note that the relationship between the two parties was normalized not because of our concession but because of our toughness and the consequences of our toughness that the Cuban Missile Crisis was avoided. Nick laughed and said, "This is the reason you used the Soviet fleet to intimidate us?" Chen-Ong nodded and said, "The comrades of the Soviet Union believe that only when we ensure that the U.S. government knows the destructive means of the People's Revolutionary Union will you understand our efforts for peace and not think that this is a provocation." Nick sneered. "So you invited us to pay attention to Mars, then blew up Mars in front of us, and then found a similar planet from the universe to teleport to Mars' orbit? This was a blatant threat of slaughter. Do you know how much work we have to do to avoid public panic? Do you know how many reports SHIELD has dealt with by astronomy enthusiasts and astrophysicists? We have to claim that when the Chitauri invaded Earth, they changed the surface shape and trajectory data of Mars. Nick also seemed to feel that what he said just now was a bit of a bluff, so he changed his tone and said in a more relaxed manner, "You know that one of the important tasks of my coming here this time is to have an unofficial dialogue with you, so why don't we be frank? What conditions do you want to promote the normalization of relations between the two sides?" Chen-Ong laughed. "Nick, my old bastard, you are too greedy. The Human Revolutionary Alliance is an interstellar nation, and we have deep prestige in the Milky Way galaxy as well as other galaxies. In the forest of the universe, the Human Revolutionary Alliance is a resounding signboard. We have diplomatic relations with more than 13,000 galactic races, planets, and the Alliance. We dominate a large part of the political ecology of the Milky Way. We have stepped out of the universe and become a respected interstellar political entity. If the U.S. establishes a normal relationship with us, it is equivalent to directly entering the forest of interstellar countries. How can it be so easy? It is impossible for the People's Revolutionary Alliance to recognize the U.S., because if we do, it will mean that there will be one more country on Earth that can compete with us politically. Now in the stars, those aliens only think that the countries on Earth that are not part of the People's Revolutionary Alliance are primitive civilizations protected by the People's Revolutionary Alliance. You are the Indian reservation in the People's Revolutionary Alliance. If I agree to normalize our relationship and establish relations between the two countries, it is almost equivalent to you agreeing to establish diplomatic relations with the Indians in the reservation in the U.S. That will not happen. Chen-Ong said, "Your only chance was 6 years ago, but you have already destroyed the chance to become a normal interstellar country. Now, in the Milky Way, you are Kashmir, you are the West Bank, and Earth is the bridgehead of the People's Revolutionary Alliance against the apocalypse. Here, only two forces are internationally recognized: the Apocalypse, because it is too terrifying, and the People's Revolutionary Alliance. In the parallel universe, we are the main force against the Apocalypse, and you are just the natives of Earth, without any political power. Just like the US seizing the Philippines colony from Spain, and the Allies dividing up the German islands in the Pacific after World War I. In this war, no one will care about the natives. Only the interests of one great power will be seized by another great power. And the natives, no matter when, have no power. Nick said with a gloomy face, "This is the reason why you cut off contact with us 6 years ago? What about the diplomatic relations at the agency level?" "That is the communication channel established according to Earth's tradition," Chun-Ong replied. "The relationship between us does not depend on Earth's tradition, but on the level of our internal ranks when you talk to us. In other words, the previous rules of the game are really just the rules of the game in the galaxy. Only what we say counts. And we will not communicate with you on an equal footing, just like how the Queen of England did not communicate with the king of a small country in India on an equal footing during the colonial period. Because that will raise your status and make us a joke in the galaxy. Those countries, the Skrulls that we destroyed, the Celestials behind the Kree, and the Xanders, will all laugh at the People's Revolutionary Alliance's diplomatic measures. Of course, this is not a reason. The People's Revolutionary Alliance does not care about their attitude. The People's Revolutionary Alliance only cares about the Apocalypse. Before you are liberated from the Apocalypse, we will not be able to look you in the eye." Nick understood what Chun-Ong meant. Chun-Ong told him on behalf of the People's Revolutionary Alliance, "Only when you are free from the control of the Apocalypse will we recognize you as the basis of all contact. If you are not free from the control, even if the Apocalypse turns on a certain switch, you, the test subjects who developed a civilization because of the Apocalypse experiment, may suddenly become the puppets of the Apocalypse. This way, there is no way to develop a relationship because there is no way to define what you are. A free life? Or something pretending to be a free life?" Then, Nick asked, "What about the creditor's rights? In fact, this should be bad news for you. We are considering selling our creditor's rights to Scrooge." Chun-Ong hesitated. "Who is he?" Nick was confused. "A duck alien, an interstellar financial tycoon. When the People's Revolutionary Alliance entered the interstellar financial market, he helped us a lot. He is also our supporter in the interstellar. You may have heard of his nephew, Donald. He is the richest person in America, an alien." "The richest person?" Nick was confused. "But there is no such person in SHIELD's files." "Ha ha ha!" Chun-Ong laughed. "What do you think rich is? Those worthless US dollars? In the interstellar, people like Stark are poor because he only has US dollars and US dollars. Ha ha! What can US dollars buy in the interstellar? They won't even sell you a battery. When Stark leaves Earth, he is like a native with a bunch of Zimbabwean dollars. I guess he can only sell his labor to make a living. In the interstellar, he is the type of person with brains," Chun-Ong explained. "He is qualified to be a qualified intellectual worker." Chun-Ong seemed to have thought of something and denied. No, it is not Zimbabwean dollars. Zimbabwean dollars are at least recognized in the international financial market. It should be the shell money used by the South Pacific Island people. The US dollar is a piece of waste paper in the interstellar market. The rich people you know are a bunch of paupers in our evaluation. Donald, on the other hand, has deposits in the interstellar bank and assets in the interstellar. He has several mining planets. Only the capital of such a person is recognized. There is a capital society in the interstellar, but the capital of America is not recognized by the market there. Because your capital cannot produce any value in the interstellar market. Capital that cannot produce market value and is isolated from the market. You know what this is? Nick stared at Chen Ong and said, I know something about the aliens. Earth strength is not bad. With our strength, we should not be discriminated against like this. Yes, Chen Ong said seriously. You have some strength. As long as you enter the interstellar countries, your US dollars, your capital, and your technology will be recognized. You have the capital, but you cannot enter the interstellar. Without entering the interstellar, your capital does not exist. It is like a company that cannot enter the market. Yes, you have strength in theory, but if you cannot enter the market, you are worthless. You might want to ask, why can't the United States enter the interstellar and become a recognized interstellar country? Because you are too far from heaven and too close to the PRI. After the rise of the PRI, all the major interstellar evaluation agencies lowered your evaluation value. You are now a junk stock. Because any political analyst knows that the PRI will not allow their home planet, which is the most important battlefield against the apocalypse, to rise an unknown interstellar country. We cannot determine friend or foe, who knows if your thoughts are simulated by the apocalypse, and if he moves a finger, you will all become machines under his control? Nick asked with a gloomy face. Then how can Scrooge take over America's debt? Scrooge is an interstellar banker. He controls a very successful duck bank in the Milky Way. The duck bank's main business is to provide packaging services to planets and civilizations that have not yet entered the interstellar, but have the potential to enter the interstellar. They invest in those primitive civilizations with potential, buy them over, and then split their asset. Just like the banks on Earth, they help those civilizations enter the interstellar, causing their worthless assets to increase in value. Scrooge relied on this method to become a financial tycoon in the Milky Way. He controls more primitive civilizations than you know. Chen Ong said, obviously, he wants to be a junk stock like you. It sounds like he is not a philanthropist. Nick said, yes, he uses this method to control those primitive civilizations, turning them into his gold mine. If the Thanes are robbing by force and the Kree are robbing by colonization, then Scrooge, as the representative of the interstellar financiers, are robbing and controlling primitive civilizations like yours, Chen Ong said. So I do not support this idea. It is too immoral. If that's the case, Nick got closer and asked in a low voice, what will Scrooge do? Chen Ong shook his head. I can't tell you, think about it. For the most basic dignity of humanity, you cannot let us become a civilization controlled by a galactic capitalist. This goes against your ideals, right? The Human Revolutionary Alliance believes in communism. Chen Ong was silent for a while before replying, fine. I'll show you that I am a firm believer. He crossed his arms and supported his chin. Scrooge's usual method is to enter your financial system through debt. He will gradually guide you to go public, and in this process, he will deepen his control step by step. Soon, you will all be mortgaging your underwear to him for the sake of going public. How can he control our country's financial system? Nick asked. Even if he has 8 trillion, there is no way we can't win against him. In the financial game on Earth, of course you have played before. Because the rules of the game are set by you, and you are also the referee. You can legislate, change the law, and even nationalize its asset. But if you want to go public and enter the galaxy, you will have to learn another way of playing. You will be controlled by another game. The rules of America will have to follow the rules of the galaxy. Over there, Scrooge is the old player and the referee, Chen Ong said. That is the rule of the galactic market established by 20,000 galactic countries. You can mortgage your planet and your human rights there. Everything is market-based. Over there, you can even sell Iron Man. Lord Gao buys heroes from various races all year round. He has a Colosseum planet. There are slave duels every day. This is legal. I think Stark is quite valuable. Do you want to consider it? Nick hesitated. Is it legal to sell slaves? There are robbers. You can capture a person and declare that you are his master. He can't resist, and you can sell him. However, this kind of slave usually can't be sold at a high price. Once the slave escapes, you will be responsible for hunting him down. If there is someone backing the slave, like the big civilizations backing their own race, you will be hunted down after you sell their people, and it might even cause a galactic war. There are also mortgage slaves. If they can't pay the loan, their personal rights will be mortgaged to the Galactic Bank. If such a slave escapes, you will be hunted down by 20,000 galactic countries. You will be wanted by the entire Milky Way. The rules of the galactic game are quite complicated, Chenong said. I can't tell you too much about such important information. You can't win against Scrooge, Chenong said. He has bought more than 200 planets. He is very familiar with this method. If you are stronger and can resist 2 or 3 moves, then you will have more power. Scrooge's control will be weaker, but if you can't win, then he will be the master of all of you. But no matter what, Scrooge has never lost a single time. He will always make a profit. It's just a small profit. In the Milky Way, Scrooge is already the best expert in going public, Chenong said. Do you want to ask why so many civilizations would rather be exploited by Scrooge and go public? Because civilizations that don't go public don't have any protection. They are like an unprotected child with gold. Why do you ask? Even adults can go public. Powerful civilizations can fight their way out and pay a few war reparations. Naturally, they are recognized as sovereign civilizations. That's how the Revolutionary Alliance went public. Nick was in a bad mood. He said, but the Revolutionary Alliance won't let Earth be invaded, so we are safe. No, it's the opposite. You are at the front line of this war. Why did we package the debt and sell it to Scrooge? First, when the Revolutionary Alliance went public, they destroyed many civilizations. First, they destroyed the Chitauris, then started a war with the Thanos, trampled on the front line of the Kree, started wars everywhere, burned glass, blew up planets, evaporated galaxies, and cleaned up the galaxy. From the beginning, we entered the game as the players who set the rules. Scrooge was the first to help us enter the interstellar financial market. He helped us familiarize ourselves with the rules of the game, then set the rules, and achieved hegemony. So, with his relationship with us, of course we are willing to let him, who is friendlier and more rational, control you. In our eyes, he is more reliable than you. Second, Scrooge is a good banker. He has never trampled on human rights. Under him, Marika is controlled economically, and it doesn't conflict with your political system. I dare say that most people don't feel that you have lost anything. Third, with your geopolitical situation, you are facing the threat of the apocalypse. Without Scrooge's help, you won't even have a path of retreat, and you could be annihilated in the war at any time. Scrooge took a huge risk to buy trash stocks like you. If it wasn't for the fact that you have a part of Earth's sovereignty, which is recognized by the Revolutionary Alliance, Scrooge wouldn't even be interested in you. Chenong said, as long as the 8 trillion debt is sold, Scrooge will immediately be able to operate the Interstellar Bank, and the weaker civilizations will be exploited. Perhaps Scrooge has already sold you out and you still don't know. It's just like how banks bully ordinary people. You have some debt and the bank will operate it, and before you know it, you will have nothing. The interstellar financial system is a powerful system supported by 20,000 civilizations in the Milky Way. Chenong continued, let me give you an example. Normally, after the 8 trillion debt is sold, you will definitely do something. You guys will definitely do something. Once Scrooge makes a move, you guys will freeze the debt. In the best case scenario, you guys will freeze the debt. In the worst case scenario, you guys will forcefully deny the debt. Then, Scrooge will question your credibility to the Interstellar Bank. The Interstellar Bank will issue an inquiry, and if you guys ignore it, they might freeze your financial channels to get listed. They will also judge that you have breached the contract. Marika's credibility will go bankrupt in the interstellar market. After the credit goes bankrupt, if you continue to issue US dollars, it will be seen as an untrustworthy currency. This way, Marika's capital will not have any value in the interstellar market. Next, they will forcefully involve you in interstellar affairs, such as setting up a company to build interstellar wormholes and demolish Earth. Of course, they won't do that, because the Revolutionary Alliance is still around. But this way, you will have no choice but to contact the interstellar market. You will need to argue and enter the interstellar system, or else you might be forcefully demolished. At this time, your credibility will go bankrupt, and you will not be able to gain the upper hand. The Interstellar Bank will enforce the mandatory terms and will mortgage the planet you have occupied as collateral for your currency. This is because you have no credibility to use as collateral. Scrooge will apply to exchange for collateral, and the Interstellar Bank will directly ignore your frozen currency and exchange it for collateral, in other words, part of the planet's land rights. If Scrooge continues to short your currency, your entire civilization will go bankrupt. Then, without you knowing, you will be sold to Scrooge. This is the Interstellar Bank. It is toying with you, just like how Marika wants Nauru to go bankrupt. The atmosphere on Nick's side was as heavy as a mountain. Nick said in a low voice, "I will go back and consider what you said. SHIEL. D hopes that Spear can take over this debt. I will convince the government to unfreeze this debt, and the transfer of the overseas assets of the Revolutionary Alliance will also speed up." Chen Ong replied, "We will strive to take over the overseas assets and debt, and transfer them to the Holy Shield. Believe me, before we are liberated from the control of the apocalypse, the best relationship between Marika and the Revolutionary Alliance is no relationship at all. We will not care about each other, and that is the best situation. Marika's productivity has no value to the Revolutionary Alliance. Value comes from the condensation of labor, and Marika's labor force is already far out of touch with the Revolutionary Alliance. Right now, the average labor force of our citizens has already surpassed the entire Marika, and the resources and ability to change reality that any Revolutionary Alliance citizen enjoys far exceed your entire civilization. In this situation, the US dollar is best used as waste paper. Instead of being packaged and put into the market by us, once we try to extract some value, Marika will be finished. This is inhumane. I will try my best to avoid this situation from happening." Lawyer Luke, who was listening on the other side, was confused. He had no idea what they were talking about. Chapter 11:18. If Justine could see through the mirror to the other side, he would see Chen Ong and Nick sitting in the corridor, with a mirror hanging on the closed door. Inside the room, Circe smelled wax. She raised her hand in the dark and saw that her hand was scarlet. Circe was startled. She sat up and observed carefully, only to find that her hand was full of red rust. It was red mold. She didn't know when the pillow and quilt had been covered with mold. Just as Circe observed the details of the mold on her hand and tried to break away from this illusory world, behind her, the wax figure standing at the door had melted. The white wax melted and dripped, revealing the gray skin under the wax. As the wax fell to the floor, most of the shell on the wax figure had been peeled off. What was revealed was a thin body wrapped in wax, and the white candle tears remained on her facial features. Her face was a stiff gray, and her dehydrated skin and flesh could no longer support the skeleton of the corpse, making her appear skinny and emaciated. When some pieces of wax fell, they tore off part of the skin, exposing part of the body's muscles and bones. The body wrapped in wax slowly turned her head and looked at Circe. At this time, Circe also heard the sound of the wax shell peeling off. Her body stiffened, and she looked down to see the shadow of the wax figure on the ground. The shadow reflected the movement of the wax figure. Circe was not afraid of corpses. Corpses were just dead things for her voodoo materials. She used corpses to make voodoo dolls, which was the core secret of the voodoo sect. Every voodoo sect wizard was proficient in making voodoo dolls, which was an ancient African witchcraft. It was a substitute that wizards used to protect themselves. In the ancient legend of the voodoo sect, they were the priests of the tribe, guarding the door of the soul. Behind the door was death. In order to avoid death, they opened the door of the soul and took away their souls. The wizards used their hair and witchcraft to create substitute dolls, hoping that they could trick death. Even if the wizards were caught by death, they could attach their souls to the voodoo dolls to avoid being caught behind the door. For a long time, wizards had used voodoo dolls to guard the door, to prevent the soul gate from being opened. It also prevented the thing behind the soul gate from letting the power of death come out. The voodoo doll wasn't a sealed artifact but a seal. Since the gate wasn't a physical existence, it was a concept from life to death, and it represented the concept of going from one world to another. Therefore, the ancient tribe where the voodoo cult originated from couldn't have a physical guardian like Wakanda and Ebola. Therefore, they created a voodoo doll that contained the souls of all the voodoo cult's dead wizard. Guard the door. Now, the first and strongest voodoo doll had been snatched away, and the door had also opened. The opening of the door meant that the path from the world of the dead to the world of the living had been opened. It meant that some things could return to this world through the door. This door was formless and intangible, but it was a concept. Anything that had the concept of connecting to another world could be a door. For example, a mirror, or a specific time, the Zhongyuan Ghost Festival, the Night of 100 Ghosts, or a ceremony, lighting a candle at the crossroads. After the door was opened, these concepts that were given a specific meaning by human cultural activities would have a different power. The door wasn't a physical thing, it wasn't something that could be seen or touched, but it was a kind of law of the universe. It represented the law of the universe of death. One day a few weeks ago, Circe suddenly discovered that the door was open. At that time, she was wandering at night, and there was a strange sound coming from the attic. Then, she went up to check. It was nothing because the attic was where she kept her things related to witchcraft. Although it looked gloomy, it was actually very safe. Everything changed on that day. Before that, although Circe was a witch who had taken over someone else's body, she didn't look gloomy or scary. Instead, she looked happy and bright, enjoying life. But on that day, she saw the people she had killed. The kind-hearted nurse Caroline, the young and promising lawyer Luke, the two children who had been burned to death in black bodies by their parents, Violet and Ben Devriac. They appeared in front of Circe, letting her experience the torture they had suffered. If Justine hadn't discovered something wrong and used witchcraft to save Circe, she would probably have died in the attic. From that day on, Circe and Justine knew that they would probably have to fight with these things forever, until they fell into eternal hell and were consigned to eternal damnation. The voodoo doll was a substitute and also a gatekeeper. They made many voodoo dolls and filled all the rooms in this house. They thought of ways to use witchcraft to hide themselves so that they could not be discovered. The voodoo dolls could prevent those things from coming out of the door and also prevent them from crossing the door. Relying on these dolls, Circe and Justine hid from place to place. In order to completely get rid of these things, they needed to perform a witchcraft created by Voodoo Queen Lavelle. Lavelle's blessing. They needed to kill the two people and refine them into a special voodoo doll. Then, they would hide the souls that were targeted by the evil spirits, create a fake soul shadow, and cover the special voodoo doll to deceive those evil spirits. Circe and Justine began to look for candidates to make this voodoo doll, but before they were ready, a young man who claimed to be an insurance investigator came to the door, followed by a black man. They had to change their target. Circe came back to her senses and struggled out of her involuntary memories. She noticed that in this room, all the voodoo dolls had come to life. The voodoo dolls protected them, but at the same time, they were not necessarily safe. The thing behind the door could infect those dolls, making them strange and even dangerous. Circe did not know what kind of danger this kind of voodoo doll posed, because the previous ones had been infected. They had taken care of everything. However, she knew that the voodoo doll could be used as a vessel for souls, and similarly, it could also be used as a vessel for evil spirit. Cecil didn't even need to think to know that these dolls with evil spirits in them didn't have any good intentions towards him. The corpse in the wax figure began to dance. She tiptoed, spun, and jumped, just like an elegant ballet when she was alive. She was an excellent ballet dancer when she was alive, but she later retired due to illness. In despair, the dancer turned to witchcraft in order to return to her beloved stage. The wizard granted her wish, but hid the crueler price. In the end, the dancer was made into a wax figure, fixed at the moment when she danced. Her soul was also imprisoned in the wax figure forever, becoming the wizard's best work, a voodoo doll. As the corpse danced, the tips of her toes supported all the weight of her body. Her stiff body was as flexible as it could be, like a puppet on strings. This made her dance look like a puppet dance. She was as stiff as a mechanical puppet and danced a standard ballet. The corpse dancing in the shadows was a dance of life and death. It was soul-stirring horror and beauty. "Why don't you go up and dance together?" Circe heard her husband, who was lying next to her, whispering. Circe suddenly found that this face was too young, just like Lawyer Luke when he was in his 20s. But what made her afraid was that Lawyer Luke, who was in his 20s, was not her husband. The door opened and the shaft made a twisting sound. She heard the sound of a spring turning, click. The slightly closed door was pushed open by a hand, and the figure of Chen Ong appeared at the door. He smiled and walked in with light footsteps. Behind him was a thick shadow, and one had to look carefully to see that it was the shadow of a person. Chen Ong lowered his voice and said, "Are you asleep?" Chapter 11:19. You must be very confused. Chen Ong said, "You have some questions to ask. For example, who are we? What is the purpose of coming here? What do we know?" "Don't worry, I can answer you one by one." Chen Ong sat in the dark room with his back against the dancing corpses. The dancing demons in the room made him look like a ghost. He said slowly, "You can rest assured that we are not interested in you. We are only here to observe that door. In the entire voodoo cult, there are only a few people who know that the real sealed object is that door. Although the sealed door is open, there are only a few people who can really get close to it." Seeing Nick's puzzled expression, Chen Ong suddenly smiled and said, "You don't think that every mirror can lead to that door, do you? In fact, according to the data found by the Holy Shield, the door has just been opened, so there are very few people who can get close to it. Some voodoo cult wizards in Africa have unexpectedly disappeared. In remote villages in various continents of the United States, some cult organizations have disappeared. Only people like you can get close to the door." Chen Ong looked up and said, "There is a wall between the known common-sense world and the unknown mysterious world. This wall isolates myths, legends, ghosts and magic, blocking those unknown mysteries behind the wall. But after the soul gate is opened and the things behind the gate are released, the first wave of impact will naturally be you, who are behind the wall. Death still needs some time to break through the wall of knowledge. There is still some time for ordinary people protected by the wall of knowledge to touch the door, but this precious period of safety is not long. That is why I brought him to you. We want to know what is the door guarded by the voodoo cult. What is behind the door? What secrets do you know about the soul gate and death? And the secret of the fifth seal, who else knows?" Circe said with difficulty, "You are here to investigate the fifth seal. You want to know where the original sin is?" Chen Ong smiled and said, "No, I know where the original sin is. What I want to ask is, who else knows where it is?" Nick raised his eyebrows and said, "You know where the fifth seal is?" You didn't tell us. If you want to protect a secret, the fewer people who know, the better. Chernong said lightly. It's best if only I know. Cersei said, so the reason you asked me is, of course, to kill them. In order to protect the fifth seal, all insiders better shut up. Either never say it like me, or die. We don't know more than others. We are just ordinary wizards. Cersei begged. Voodoo wizards are everywhere. The secret of the gate has long disappeared in history, just like that ancient tribe. Let us go. If Mary Lauver's left and right hands are also ordinary magi and know nothing about it, then the voodoo cult really has no secrets to speak of. Chen Ong sneered. You've been following Laveau for so long. She's the founder of the voodoo sect, the famous Empress Voodoo. As a Creole, the process of Lavelle establishing the voodoo sect and inheriting the legacy of the Benin voodoo tribe was a little too smooth. The voodoo sect is different from the Wakanda and Ebola tribes. It's already strange that you know those secrets. After the voodoo tribes perished, the seals and culture they inherited were passed down in the ancient religions of Benin. However, without the tribes as inheritances, the ancient legends passed down by word of mouth will lose a lot of key information. I've sent someone to investigate in Benin. The secrets that were passed on orally by the wizards of primitive religions have become a mixture of myths and legends. They are very vague. My men went through a lot of trouble to figure out the existence of the gate from those messy legends and myths, and the poison sect's headquarters in the sea actually knows the core secrets of the voodoo tribe? You even know about the Gate of Souls. This part of it doesn't even exist in Benin. I can't help but guess. There's definitely something wrong with Laveau. She didn't establish the voodoo sect as a summary and sublimation of the African primitive religions popular in Haiti, but with the secrets she knew as the core, she gradually integrated those scattered primitive religions and created the voodoo sect. Chen Ong analyzed step by step and exposed Cersei's disguise. The fifth seal. Chen Ong said slowly, you shouldn't know about the fifth seal at all. No one in the four ancient tribes knows the secret of the fifth seal, because during the first mutation of the Stairway of the Sun, in order to avoid leakage, the core of this secret was handed over to the ancient Egyptians for safekeeping, and the remaining parts were scattered among the various ancient civilizations. The secrets kept by the ancient Egyptians were taken into the pyramids by En-Hetien. Later, when the Holy Shield reactivated the floating pyramids, they found this part, plus the ones we already have. Only we have all the secrets and know the location of the fifth seal, the original sin. So I want to know where Laveau learned this. What else does she know? Cersei said in horror, I can't tell you about Queen Laveau. I can't say it at all. If I want to say it, Queen Laveau can take our lives no matter where she is. So I didn't intend to ask you at all. Chen Ong said, do you still remember those dusty memories that inexplicably appeared in your mind just now? Cersei's expression became very frightened. Chen Ong nodded and said, I did peek into your memory, and I already know most of the secret. What I want to know now are the things in your mind that are cursed and don't dare to recall. Why would I tell you so much? I just want you to believe. Have you heard of it? In witchcraft, belief is a kind of power. And this power of belief was brought back by Laveau from behind the door. Chen Ong slowly said in Cersei's ear. These words made her struggle violently, but her whole body was stiff and she could not move. And the reason why Cersei could not move was that there was still a soul in her body. The original owner of this body, Caroline, who had returned from behind the door. Chen Ong deciphered the secrets in Cersei's brain. He began to come into contact with the door. Human thoughts exist in the mind, and all objective reality is based on human perception. The world we know, or rather, the world we know, is the projection of the real world on consciousness. Therefore, our world is composed of two parts, the truth of reality and the truth of consciousness. Some mental patients perceive the same reality as us, but because their way of perceiving the world and internal logic are different from ours, the world they perceive is different from ours. This distortion based on consciousness and information will change our world. Based on this, witchcraft will not change the objective world, nor will it change science, but it can change the world we perceive. By distorting the internal logic of our cognition, we can distort the world. And this power of distortion comes from the transmission of information such as language, ideas, beliefs, and behavior patterns. It is similar to the role of genes in the evolution of living things. This concept can be called memes. The so-called gate is not the gate of the soul that leads to death or the gate of life and death, but a gate of consciousness that locks the existence of anti-logic, anti-knowledge, and anti-common sense in human consciousness that goes against the internal logic of logic. It does not exist in the real world, but in each of our consciousnesses. It is the chaotic data that was locked when the apocalypse created human consciousness. Human consciousness is a quantum algorithm. This algorithm follows the laws set by the apocalypse, basic reason and logic. Once this basic reason and logic are lost, human consciousness will become chaotic data, and the window through which humans perceive the real world will be distorted into something indescribable. This basic law stipulates the way humans observe the world and all the concepts humans use to understand reality. Once this door is broken, all the concepts humans have about everything will gradually collapse. Humans will not be able to understand mathematics because mathematics is based on basic logic. The reason why 1 + 1 = 2 cannot be falsified and is absolutely correct is because it is based on human basic reason. Once this basic reason is gone, this cognition will also collapse. Mathematics does not originate from the observation of the natural world and reality, but from the basic reason of consciousness. Chun-Ong slowly explained to Nick, without opening this door, human consciousness is an algorithm created by the apocalypse, a black box system. How can the Human Revolutionary Alliance believe you? But once this door is opened, it means the collapse of human basic reason. Just like the collapse of the human immune system, this door is the human consciousness immune system. After the door is opened, the immune system will collapse, and your consciousness will be easily infected by information from the outside world. All the products of human cultural activities, language, words, and the information contained will contaminate your consciousness like a virus. In the past, when your consciousness still had internal logic, you could easily distinguish which information and understand it correctly. But without that door, you will lose the basic ability to distinguish information. At that time, a sentence, a paragraph of text, or a legend can easily distort your consciousness. You are like a system with a firewall removed, allowing all information viruses to infect you. This is the truth of the soul gate. It really is a door that protects your soul. Behind it is not death, but the chaotic data that death sealed when your consciousness was created by the order of the apocalypse. Memes are not scary. It is a normal method of information transmission, but once the soul gate, the firewall of consciousness collapses, then memes become scary, because they can infect our basic reason, and memes become mimetic viruses. Chun-Ong said to Nick solemnly, "Can you imagine that a sentence I say to you, a line of words you read in a book, can change and distort your consciousness? Can you imagine that a short piece of information can turn you into a psychopath?" Modern society is an explosion of knowledge and information. People receive a huge amount of information every day. Once this door, this firewall is closed, they will be receiving a large number of mimetic viruses at every moment. In less than a day, all humans in the apocalypse era, the new humans, will become crazy. This is the second impact of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Now, the wall of cognition, or in other words, common sense, will replace the firewall to protect humanity. It may only last for a week. After a week, the wall of cognition will collapse, and human consciousness will be unprecedentedly fragile, facing the test of the apocalypse. You must find a way for humanity to survive. Some of the people in the Revolutionary Alliance were also created by the apocalypse, which is why we do not distinguish between the new humans and the old humans. The Republic has already issued the first human consciousness safety warning, injecting the internal population with a consciousness vaccine, artificially creating a conscious immune system. Nick, we will lend a helping hand, but you must first strengthen yourselves. We will only act at the last moment. Chapter 11:20. Nick's face turned pale. Chen-Ong comforted him. I hope you don't hate me. Nick looked up. Why do you say that? Because the more you know, the more dangerous it is. Humans can't know these things, but humans must know before they can solve it. Chen-Ong sighed. The more you know, the more dangerous it is. This is not an empty saying. You're still safe now because you haven't realized it yet. The firewall of consciousness, or rather, the locked chaotic consciousness data, allows human consciousness to be protected in a safe system. Of course, you can also think of it as a shackle. In any case, you're protected in an orderly and understandable world. But now, the shackle that protected you has disappeared. Now, human consciousness and rationality are operating on inertia. This inertia is what I call the wall of knowledge that protects you. It can also be called common sense. Because common sense, humans haven't started to let their imaginations run wild and retain some resistance to the mimetic virus. Once you overturn common sense and start letting your imaginations run wild, you'll find that there's nothing to help you distinguish between these things. You'll enter the world of mental patience, unable to break free from the world where your consciousness is distorted. Nick didn't dare to think about what Chen-Ong said. It was best not to think now. Once he did, he would be doomed eternally. But he had to think. Only by thinking could he find a solution to the problem. With the collapse of the firewall that protected human consciousness, humans would no longer be able to understand the world rationally and distinguish between reality and fantasy. Mental patients often create illusions and distort reality. A mental patient with abnormal consciousness might believe that there are countless pairs of eyes watching him. He would be nervous all day, suspecting that someone was spying on him. The reason normal people wouldn't be like this is because our consciousness still has basic rationality. We can tell that the information is our imagination, but once we lose this ability, we'll see a pair of eyes, from a poster hanging at home or some other place, but we lose the ability to distinguish. We can't tell if it's our imagination or not. Then we'll really see a pair of eyes. We've entered the world of mental patience. We begin to lose the protection of common sense. We begin to blur the real eyes and the eyes in portraits, TV, and photos. We'll see that there are eyes everywhere in the world. Our consciousness begins to warp and distort. From this point on, the entire normal world collapses. Some concepts in our consciousness will be distorted, such as the eye. Anything with a hole in it, anything that looks like an eye, will appear to us as an eye. Then we will be surrounded by eyes, and the concept of eyes will be completely distorted and out of control. Then there will be other things. We will not be able to tell which things are people. People have eyes, but now there are eyes everywhere. Then, the concept of people began to distort. What was a person? People could not tell. The posters hanging on the wall were regarded as people, and the people walking on the street were regarded as indescribable things. If you can't tell what a person is, then what is a murder? What was killing? Bumping into a mosaic on the street, what was that? Just crush them. This was a world of lunatic. Everyone could lock up a lunatic, but what if everyone was a lunatic? Cognitive disorder, distorted consciousness, close to insanity. No matter how hard Nick tried to stop himself from thinking about it, he still gradually understood Chen-Ang's consciousness. The wall of common sense that protected his consciousness, which was already exceptionally weak in the first place, collapsed. He had also come into contact with the gate of souls and those irrational things. His face was pale. Nick was a man made of iron, but he was still shocked by what he thought of. Chen quickly held him down and said, "Don't think too much. Don't imagine the world after the virus spreads. Once you imagine it, you might really be able to see that world. You will go crazy. You will think that everyone is a lunatic. You will lose the concept of the difference between a lunatic and a human. You will not be able to tell who is a lunatic and who is a normal person." "You've caused me so much trouble," Nick said anxiously. "You've really caused me so much trouble. Don't be nervous. You will go crazy if you are nervous." Chen said, "You have to overcome these difficulties with your own strong willpower. Nick, you are the person with the strongest willpower I have ever seen. If you are also driven crazy, then you will not be able to escape. If you are also driven crazy, is there still hope for humanity? You also know about this?" Nick grabbed him and asked, "Why won't you go crazy?" Chen did not dare to say that he had caught the wrong person. Seeing how Nick was holding the dancing corpse, he knew that Nick could no longer tell the difference between a human and a ghost. He tried his best to console him. "I am an old human. My consciousness was not created by the apocalypse, so there is no such gate. Nick, you are the first Homo evolutus to know the truth. Only by overcoming these difficulties can we have hope." The truth that Chen told Nick was also a kind of information, a meme. This meme could also infect the defenseless Nick. His wall of common sense collapsed. His consciousness broke away from the inertia and started the process of collapse. Chen carefully covered Nick's eyes and ears. He had to accept as little information from the outside world as possible and think as little as possible. This was because the information from the outside world was a meme virus to him, so were his memories. But this went against the reason why Chen told Nick the truth. He hoped that after Nick knew the truth, he would come up with a solution with him, but now he could not even think about it. Nick had entered the first stage of the infection, cognitive disorder. Chen could not tell Nick that the person he saw was a ghost because it was still fine for him to see a ghost as a human. For now, a ghost was a human to him, but once he realized it, he would not be able to tell the difference between a human and a ghost. Everyone could be a ghost to him, and the concept of a human would be distorted. But Chen could not hide it from Nick forever. He was a smart person. He felt the hand that he was holding. The flesh was flipped up, and he felt the bones and rotten tendons. It was cold to the touch. He knew that he was holding a corpse. He could not tell the difference between a human and a ghost. The kind that would mistake a human for a ghost. "There are so many people here." Nick's tone was cold. In Nick's consciousness, the surrounding environment changed. He was blindfolded, there were no doors or windows around him, and there was no light. He smelled the smell of decay. This smell came from the wax corpse, and it quickly connected with the corpse in his memory. Then the walls and floor made of flesh and bones started to appear. He stepped on a human face and a rotten skeleton. This was an illusion created by Nick's sense of smell after he lost his sight and hearing. But it was not an illusion for him. The memory of the corpse created by his sense of smell started to replace some of his cognition. A dancing ballerina appeared before Nick. She had a pretty face and was smiling at him vividly. Chapter 11:21. At this moment, Circe crawled up from the bed. Her head was hanging upside down, her neck was bent towards her back, and her limbs were also bent backwards. Her joints looked like they were broken, vividly depicting a body with its elbows turned inward. Even so, Circe's eyes were still moving. Upon closer observation, one could see that this state of the witch was related to Nick's understanding of her. In Nick's eyes, this strange appearance was not just a mutation, but a deeper display of the witch's original face. Caroline's face had already festered, and only a rough outline could be seen. This seemed to indicate that the witch's disguise had been seen through. And under the rotting, leaky face, where the previous face had been broken, another face had been sewn over. It was the face of an even older Madame Violet. She was full of wrinkles, her hair was white, and her teeth were uneven. The two faces were like a mask full of holes that had been sewn together. Black threads had sewn over the festering areas, and where the two sewn faces could not cover was a pair of eyes. Nick could even say that he was very familiar with this pair of eyes. They were the eyes of the brother and sister, Martin and Grace. They were exactly the same as the one in the photo. This was also evidence that what Nick saw was the information in the depths of his heart, which had been processed by his mutated consciousness. A normal human would only see an ordinary woman, but what Nick saw was his subconscious's dissimulation of what he saw. That was why he could see Caroline's and Violet's faces. Caroline's face was very clear, and it was the witch's current appearance. It was also the appearance that Nick had always seen, while Violet's face was very blurry. It was a blurry face, and all the characteristics came from the information that Nick knew. She was close to 60 years old, and had suffered a stroke. She was an old woman. In the end, it was this blurry image that was pieced together with Caroline's clear face. Because Nick had never seen Violet's photo, he did not know what she looked like. As for Grace's eyes, it was obvious that they came from the photo. Therefore, the part of the witch that represented that she had seized Grace was still in her childhood state. This gave her a pair of childlike eyes, and when placed on that old and ugly face, it was extremely terrifying. The skin on her body was loose, as if it had been sewn together from human skin. Underneath the human skin was black rotting skin. The faces and eyes that were sewn up like masks represented that in Nick's mind, the witches had taken over the bodies and identities of those people. She wore a human skin coat, but it couldn't cover her black skin. This was the image of Circe in Nick's subconscious mind, a black witch wearing human skin with someone else's face, a thing that used someone else's skin to cover her rotten body. Everything Nick saw seemed to have been crushed and reassembled by a crazy artist. What he saw was probably a world that had been reworked and created by the crazy Picasso. As for Caroline's evil spirit, it grew out of the witch's rotting stomach, dragging her intestines and her whole head out of the abdomen. This was not from the subconscious mind, but a kind of spirit vision. Chen Ong revealed that Caroline and the other evil spirits weren't real souls, but the fears and fantasies of Circe and the others. They thought that the door led to the world of the dead, and they misunderstood the meaning of death, so their fear distorted their consciousness and created those evil spirits, or rather, they created the door through which the evil spirits came out. However, human consciousness was common, and what they created out of fear was also a meme. This kind of virus could be transmitted to others, and even the old humans who didn't have a door would see the evil spirits that the wizards saw in their hallucinations. This kind of meme would infect everyone who came into contact with it, and it would create the effect of a real evil spirit taking revenge. As for Nick, the old Nick who had lost the protection of common sense, this kind of spirit vision ability was greatly enhanced. He could see the memes created by the infected, and he could also see the evil spirits created by the witch's fear. The evil spirits attached themselves to Circe's body, and they showed such a terrifying effect. Nick didn't lose his mind because of what he saw. On the contrary, he kept restraining himself and kept himself in a state of not doing anything, but he wasn't the only one who heard the fatal truth. When Chen Ong said these words, he didn't avoid Circe and Justine. Their IQ was a little lower than Nick's, and they needed a little time to think. Then the two poor people who were protected by common sense were kicked into hell. They also lost the inertia of their consciousness, and looked directly at the truth and chaos of the world. Circe clearly saw the head growing out of her abdomen, and Caroline smiling at her, endless hatred in her smile. Then she felt the human skin on her body began to wriggle. This was the other evil spirits that she had taken over, and they attached themselves to these human skins. She felt that she was coexisting with those evil spirits, and felt that they were sticking to her, growing on her skin. They coexisted with each other. Circe screamed. In Nick's eyes, she opened her mouth wide, and the mouth was so wide that a head could be stuffed inside. Her mouth was full of uneven teeth, yellow, deformed, and ugly teeth. Circe began to desperately peel off the skin. In Ch'en-Ang's eyes, she was tearing off her own skin. In the eyes of the three people present, there were three different worlds. In Ch'en-Ang's eyes, he saw Circe pulling her skin, tearing it off bit by bit with unimaginable strength. In Nick's eyes, Circe was a monster trying to tear off the human skin on her body. In Circe's eyes, she was a normal person. This was probably the only thing that was still protecting her from common sense. The skin on her body was some human skin monster that wanted to grow into her body. She had to peel it off. Circe had gone crazy. Her cognitive world was completely messed up. Her consciousness had created some mimetic virus, some monsters that distorted her world, and she could no longer tell the difference between the distorted world and the normal world. Ch'en-Ong watched as Circe pulled off all the skin and muscles on her body, turning herself into a skeleton covered in blood and flesh. Ch'en-Ong did not know what kept her from dying, but in the eyes of Nick and Circe, who had peeled off the human skin monster, revealed her true appearance, a corpse that looked like a mummy. Because they all knew that after peeling off the body that had been taken, the essence of Circe was a body that should have rotted long ago. At this time, in the eyes of their distorted consciousness, Circe's appearance somewhat overlapped with her appearance in reality, a rotten, bloody, withered, skinny skeleton. Circe's skeleton, a skeleton with some flesh still hanging on it, fell to the ground. In the eyes of Ch'en-Ong she was already dead, but in the eyes of Nick and Circe she was still alive, just in a different form. Nick had realized, and there was nothing he could do about it. The rotting, maggot-infested corpse of Celce the witch, the dancing girl, the halfling crawling under the bed. That Luke the lawyer, a young lawyer, had shared the body with J.S. Tiff, and then J.S. Tiff had given half of it back to Luke the lawyer. He dragged only half of his body, his intestines leaking out of his abdomen, and crawled on the ground. Nick would never be able to destroy these things. This was not something that could be destroyed with guns or superpowers. It was a kind of innate thinking mutation, and soon he would get used to it. The people in his eyes would mutate into his subconscious understanding of their nature. In his eyes there was no difference between life and death, and there was no difference between a corpse and a human. A person was a corpse that moved, and a corpse was a person that did not move. This kind of state could be exchanged at any time. A person's past, present, conscious things, and physical things would be revealed at the same time, turning a person into an abstract pieced-together thing. His world was like Picasso's painting. In the future, more consciousness and concepts would appear in his world in the form of abstract entities. Those nothingness concepts, time, good and evil, life and death, would exist in various symbolic and distorted states in his cognition. All the rationality that humans possessed, the perception of time, the perception of color, the concepts of shape, temperature, and life, would exist in a distorted and indescribable state. Everyone existed in the form of monsters in Nick's eyes, but soon Nick's cognition would be confused, and soon he would no longer feel strange or afraid. He would completely forget what a normal person looked like. Now, in Nick's eyes, Ch'en-Ong was countless bubbles gathered together, countless lights gathered into something that could not be seen clearly. He said to Circe, "I'm sorry, I seem to have hurt you by mistake." He turned to Nick and said, "You used to be a system that the Creator created with steel and fire in the apocalypse, a system with a strict structure and orderly operation. That was your consciousness. Now, the many elements that make up your consciousness have become something disordered and chaotic, but you still have to maintain your clarity and rationality, or else the future of humanity will be like what you see now, a distorted monster." The heavens' enlightenment extracted order and rationality from primal chaos to create your consciousness. After returning to primal chaos, you were able to maintain your consciousness and recreate yourselves. Perhaps this was the heavens' enlightenment's test for you, Ch'en-Ong said. "What is this?" Nick thought in confusion. The programmer created an AI from chaos, then messed up the AI's code, washed it into a chaotic state, and expected it to recreate itself. What kind of fantasy is this? At this moment, Nick sincerely hoped that his god was the monkey that sat in front of the typewriter and kept on typing, creating them out of the countless possibilities in his mind. It was not a programmer or scientist who relied on reason and wisdom to create them, and then began to run and test them, carrying out all kinds of whimsical tests, to wash the artificial intelligence into a chaotic algorithm and create itself again to carry out such a sensational act. Why can't our God be a monkey? The monkey would create chaotically, then end chaotically, and the monkey god would press the button to destroy everything at some point, but Nick could accept this. This was an unknown fate. But a scientist was God. He would start from a rational and orderly start, create with precision, and then experiment repeatedly, hoping to see the results he expected, something unexpected or expected. Just like a white mouse facing a researcher, an unknown fate, it was someone else's prank. As one of the lab rats, Nick sincerely hoped that his fate could be controlled by a monkey. Chapter 11:22. Nick felt a warm and soft sensation beneath his feet, as if he was stepping on his internal organs. The entire floor of the mansion had turned into a slippery, wriggling material. The ceiling above his head was a mass of lumps of flesh that looked like tumors, wriggling like soft flesh at the throat. Nick's lower body had turned into a slug-like axe leg that slithered on the surface. He felt as if he had become a mollusk. Your condition is starting to get serious. The being that seemed to be piled up from countless bubbles that were as deep as the universe and as bright as the sun said, "But it's fine. If the consciousness of an ordinary person is some scattered sugar, you are that kind of hard, ice-cold sugar cube. Under the impact of this chaotic information, you can hold on a little longer." The fact that you can still maintain your consciousness means that the consciousness inertia that sustains your rationality has not disappeared. That is why there are only initial symptoms of cognitive disorder. If this continues, you can last for 3 days before the confusion in your consciousness will further deepen, provided that you do not directly face those aberrant mimetic viruses. "The situation is still good," the voice said. "It's not as bad as I thought." "You call this the situation is still good?" Nick said. "I suspect that I have already gone mad. Those who have truly gone mad do not know that they have gone mad." Chenong said. "Right now, you can still distinguish that you have entered an abnormal state. I originally expected that you would completely distort your cognition and not realize your abnormality. It would be like a dream, thinking that all the absurd situations you encounter are normal. How are you going to explain to S.H.I.E.L.D. in that situation?" Nick said. "Are you going to let me, who has already gone mad, go back? I will give you a device to manually interfere with cognition." Chenong took out a pair of glasses. "Use this pair of glasses. Through calculation and simulation, it will interfere with your vision, filter out the mimetic viruses, and manually interfere with the information you have obtained. It is like installing a device to manually filter harmful substances in your consciousness." Nick put on the glasses, and the whole world returned to normal. Although it still appeared distorted, dark, and bizarre, at least it looked a little more normal. Nick ignored the walls with faces on them, and the chandelier above him that was twisted like a skeleton. The floor under his feet had also returned to normal, except that it was filthy, bloody, and wet with moss. Nick looked at the slug covered in black mucus crawling over his feet, and his face twitched. "It's much better now. Really." He saw Chin Eng's head glowing like a light bulb. "You subconsciously feel that this place is dirty and dark. You feel that there are a lot of germs and microbes here, and your spirit vision distorts these feelings. The blood stains on the walls, the slugs and moss on the ground, they are all symbols projected by your spiritual perception." Chen Ong said. "And the soul door in your consciousness has been opened, And it has also released your consciousness shackles. What do you mean? Nick asked. You can sense some information that was previously suppressed by common sense. Other than the five senses, humans also have conscious senses. Before the shackles are released, the things that the consciousness observes will be forgotten, and occasionally appear in the form of dreams. This is the reason why the five senses relax the suppression on the consciousness during sleep, allowing these things that you previously couldn't sense to surface. Chen-Ong explained the reason with knowledge that leaned towards mysticism. Seeing that Nick still didn't understand, he added, in layman's terms, your spirit vision can see some clues that normal people can't. Spirit vision is a kind of distortion of consciousness. It's the result of distorting your five senses and adding them to your senses. It contains many elements of illusion and madness, but it also contains some extraordinary senses that belong to rationality. Chen-Ong said, It's very dangerous, but it's also very useful. How long can this pair of glasses protect me? Nick asked calmly. Chen-Ong was silent for a moment before answering. If you don't look directly at things that contain more chaotic information and more powerful memes, it can maintain your basic rationality for a week. This thing takes over my information receiving window and, in other words, my senses. By interfering with my senses, it filters out those harmful mimetic viruses. Nick said. Doesn't that mean that you know everything that I sense? Chen-Ong nodded. Yes. The artificial intelligence in the Republic will filter the information you receive. If you feel that it's inappropriate, you can return it to me. Then I won't be able to work at all, Nick said coldly. A large number of illusions and disturbs my cognition. If I can't distinguish what appears in front of me, why the hell would I still be the director of S.H.I.E.L.D.? The current director of S.H.I.E.L.D. is Coulson. Chen-Ong reminded him. To hell with him. Nick adjusted the color of the lenses, making them as transparent as a pair of sunglasses. Now that the situation is critical, I have to do it myself. I will isolate myself from the most confidential information. Don't even think about getting anything through me. Although Nick said so, he knew that he had to expose some secrets to the Revolutionary Alliance. Not because of anything else, but because he had to choose the lesser of two evils. Letting the Revolutionary Alliance know some of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s secrets was better than letting all humans go crazy. Nick walked out of the mansion. This time, he finally understood what it meant by, "You know too much." Nick had never experienced such a terrible danger of knowing too much. The sky was already slightly brightening. If the sun rising from the east was still the sun, it looked more like the mouth of a well, as if there was a hole in the sky. Light and some other things flowed out from the hole, as if the wound in the sky was bleeding pus. The moon in the sky had not completely set yet. Nick glanced at it. He immediately felt that his spirit vision had deepened a little. What the hell was that? A wriggling ball of flesh full of tentacles with eyes of all sizes growing on it. When Nick looked up at it, some of the eyes were also looking at him. An indescribable feeling, like being massaged by a giant squid, enveloped Nick's whole body. What the hell is that thing? Nick cursed in horror. The moon. Chen-Ong said lightly. That thing looks like this. Why does the moon look like this? Nick said. What the hell is on it? On the moon, what the hell is there? It has always been like this, but with your spirit vision, you can see more of the truth. That's all. F***CK. Nick cursed. Chen-Ong raised his watch and glanced at the projected information. Your rationality has weakened again. Don't look, don't think about those things. Now is not the time to know as much as possible. On the contrary, the less you know, the safer you will be. That thing has always been watching us from the moon? Nick's tone was grim. It has been like this since ancient times. Chen-Ong was a man of few words. The more he spoke, the faster Nick's rationality fell. I have to close that door before I go crazy. Nick held the cigarette in his mouth. He ignored the wriggling, smelly, dirty, slimy smoke that was like a worm. He gritted his teeth and inhaled the putrid smell. How many people in SHIELD can bear the truth? Chenong asked. If you fail, we need to find someone else to take over your job. At least one person must know the truth. Nick thought for a long time. His mind was already a little chaotic. Coulson can't do it, damn it. I can't think of anyone who can last more than 2 days. The minds of agents are too complicated. They store more information, and the wall of common sense is not strong enough, Chenong said. The simpler the person, the stronger their resistance. The more stubborn the person, the less likely they are to go crazy. Stubborn. Nick took a deep breath. Then it can only be my old buddy, Frank. He is the most stubborn person I have ever met. The Punisher? Chenong said. Yes. He may be more twisted than a normal person at the beginning, but he has a higher tolerance for the later infection and can resist it longer. You need to give Frank some authority, then return to SHIELD and deal with some matters. Chenong said calmly. Then we can start looking for a solution to the problem. Lavelle? Nick asked. Chenong did not say anything, tacitly agreeing with Nick's guess. After a long time, when the big hole in the east, the mouth of the well, gradually shifted to the middle of the sky, Chenong said, "Lend Dr. Reed to us for a while." What for? Nick frowned. He is researching teleportation technology. That's too simple. The Republic has been monitoring the space around Earth. This can't be hidden from us. It looks like he is about to succeed. I want to push the boat with the current and let him test the waters for us. Where are you going to take him? Nick asked. Chenong did not answer directly. Do you know? We don't have enough time to solve the riddle now. We can't solve the questions set by the Death Knight. We can only copy the answers. Right now, we can only be bad students who are ready to copy the answers next door. Let's pray that the examiner doesn't pay attention to us. Send Reed over and pretend that it is an experimental accident. Nick's eyes darkened and he interrupted thoughtfully. He nodded slightly. Creating such accidents, we are professionals. Reed is our beacon, Chenong said. I will pretend to stop Ulysses from opening the fourth seal. We need to protect the hero's wall of common sense, so we can't let them know the truth. There is no point in stopping the fourth seal. The test has begun, and we can't delay it. I will trick them over and use a reason similar to the final battle to gather the opposition on Earth that has given us a headache with them, and then send them over. I will be responsible for guiding them step by step to find the answers we need. At the same time, hide the situation and delay the collapse of their wall of common sense. You are responsible for cooperating. If they feel something is wrong, I will jump to the other side and you will be responsible for guiding them. Jump to the other side? Nick said doubtfully. Can you do it? Chenong grinned and clenched his fist. Being a villain. I am super professional. Nick was still doubtful. Won't Ulysses Crow, Ebony Ho, and Namor cause trouble for us if we send them over? Now it is time to make use of them. Chenong's eyes flickered. I will make them helpless. When necessary, I will beat them until they are convinced and then stand up to lead them. Doctor Strange is the easiest person to discover the truth. We still need him later and the power of the time gem, so he can't go crazy. Because he used the time gem too much, he has been targeted by something outside of time. When the time comes, I will banish him outside of time, and when necessary, you can pull him back. Just say that I am the mastermind behind everything. That should be able to deceive him for a while. Nick's expression was uncertain. He said solemnly, My current state is too dangerous. I can go crazy at any time. If something happens to me, there will be a big flaw in the plan. Chenong said, Go find Dr. Strange and tell him that you suspect there's something wrong with me. Get him to help you suppress your chaotic consciousness. Strange has studied the 7 chapters of Mystic Lord, so he has a way to help you maintain a portion of your rationality. Tell him that I lied to you about the information and caused you to be infected by the evil god. You can only come out when necessary. Too early or too late will affect our plan.